Hello, Doovoid here. We are live on my channel, unfortunately talking about coronavirus again. Last week I did a stream, just hitting Michigan. My synagogue had closed down. There had been a few reported cases. This week, God forbid, there's already close to 1,000 cases in Michigan, mostly in Detroit and Metro Detroit. People are already dying here in my area in New York City. I appeared on Luke Ford's show, and it's bad. God forbid it's bad. So I'm going to talk about it again, and we're going to try to dig more into the scientific evidence. What is coronavirus? How do viruses spread? Why is it that we were just mentioning it last week, and now all of a sudden 1,000 people are infected and people are already starting to die. God forbid, why are we on complete lockdown? Multiple states across the United States have issued stay-at-home orders, which basically means it's illegal to leave your house for any non-essential function. And so we'll probably talk more about that. I'm not going to talk about these stay-at-home or quarantine. I'm going to talk more about the science of the virus itself and the medicine of it and the various factors. And maybe afterwards, I think Jennifer, Church of Entropy, regular host of Week in Review on her channels, joined me, and we'll hopefully add in some of her expertise as we go through this.
Thanks for having me, Doovoid. Looking forward to the show.
Okay, so it looks like nobody's watching, so that's fine. The sound is good, and hopefully people will come in. We got a few people, so thanks for joining, Steve. Okay, so just I want to clear a few things off my desk. So I watched a whole bunch of information. Like I spent probably close to 50 hours this week researching coronavirus. Here's a nice. This man was. This is the MedCram Medical Lectures Explained. I guess for medical students, medical school students, and he started January 26th following the virus, and had these little lectures each day, like update the science of it, and it also kind of explains biochemistry. Shows the cycle biologically what's happening, and they're like 5 to 10, sometimes 15 minutes long, and I don't know if he updated one yesterday, but for people who really want to dig into this, it's a deep topic. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a doctor. Me and Jennifer both have a background in science. But if you think you've been infected by coronavirus, seek your medical help. We'll answer questions and talk about it. But I'm just giving the best of the knowledge. But here's the stream we did last week. We're talking about the spread, the articles, and thank God that I guess we're kind of where it was predicted. Like I followed the experts and, said what we said last week, but here we are again, and it's spread. Like I was watching this. This is from the University of California, San Francisco, their medical school. So they've put out a series of videos, doctors who are actually in the field. Here's another one. I had watched a whole bunch of videos on it, but let's just start with a PowerPoint to get right into some educational material. This is just from an international kind of basic type thing. Did you have any comments before I start going through these slides?
No, go ahead, Doovoid. I'll just listen in for now.
Okay, so here we go. This is we have the coronavirus disease, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19. So I just found these slides. I'm not a medical expert, and I have quite a few to go over. So I'm someone like JF or someone who might understand what all these variables mean, but I'm going to do my best. So a lot of this we all know. The beginning of the outbreak in Wuhan in late December. We talked about it in a Week in Review. We were following it, and generally, okay, we were following it, but at that point, it seemed pretty unlikely that it was going to migrate all the way to America, or even to where I am, and I guess Jennifer is even further away where it hasn't hit her to personally affect her situation. But like here, Michigan's state of emergency, people are dying already, God forbid. So largely through travel, we'll see more about the mechanism of the virus and talk more about it. But this, although likely it started in animals, once it reached humans, it was able to travel successfully from humans to humans, and it's been successfully able to travel from human to human basically all around the world. How's it being spread? Just like a common flu, God forbid, we'll see more graphics on it, like exactly how it gets in you, what it attaches to. But basically droplets of mucus that are all along our nose, mouth, esophagus, gastroendocrinological tract. And when we speak, when we cough, when we sneeze, those particles spit out, usually eventually resting on a surface. Sometimes they could stay in the air for a certain amount of time. But basically those get put in the air, someone else breathes them in, and they attach to the right receptor, and then they multiply. Also from touching objects, then touching your face, and we're going to see a lot more about it. So basic symptoms, God forbid, if you're not feeling good and have no reason to think you should be sick and saying I must be sick because it's coronavirus, God forbid. So the symptoms, the most common is the fever, sore throat, cough, shortness of breath, muscle aches, diarrhea. We're going to see much more with actual percentages. This is just a very basic one I wanted to start with. Diagnostics, treatment. As of now, there's no known cure. There's possible what we'll call treatments that alleviate the symptoms of it, but don't necessarily cure it. And we'll talk more about that. And that's what most people are talking about. The obvious thing that you're hearing all over the place that I'd been hearing a month before it hit Michigan, when people were worried about it, to wash your hands frequently, soap, 20 seconds to destroy all the viral material, careful with your coughs and sneezes. And then we're going to go more into social distancing, but just to cover these basics because they're important. Anyone who watches this or catches this stream, I'm sure you're hearing this over and over again, but it's important. Avoid touching your face. It's difficult. We'll talk more about strategies for that. Be careful about sharing germs like food and drinks. Avoid exposure. Keep away from people. Group activities. Shaking hands. At this point, just saying keep a meter or two away from everybody. It might be difficult depending on your personality. Doooovid generally practices social distancing even when there is no virus scare. So, but other people who are more close and close with people in a certain way may be more difficult for them to, do these social distancing practices. We'll talk more about it. Avoid travel to affected areas. So if you're in America, that means the major urban areas and the political implications, which I'll cover the science later before we talk about it, will be, like the red states versus the blue states, where it appear the blue states are much safer. But because of population density, but dense population areas that are parts of international centers are the most likely to get these, and almost at this point it's almost guaranteed eventually we'll get this. Although we'll see, is it possible that it's not going to spread the whole world? And talk more about that later with the more in detail, like genetic and how the virus really works. Basic seek medical attention at this point. Don't overload the hospitals. If there's no reason you should be sick and you're getting a fever now, especially here, it's you're warming up, you could probably get tested at this point. So we'll talk more, like you got to find the most up-to-date information in your area to, for you to know what to do if you think you have coronavirus, God forbid, but we'll talk more about it. The screening now, I'll show this, my dad's medical office after this, and how places that are remaining open are dealing with it. So as a single person who doesn't have a responsibility to society, You could just kind of quarantine. But if you have to maintain your position and responsibility to society, despite the heavy risk that's currently going on right now through coronavirus, so we're going to talk about those procedures. Masks, when to wear masks, what are the different masks? We'll talk about it. Do you need a mask? And more information. So let me hand it over to Jennifer for a minute while I prepare some more information.
Hello, everyone. Those of you that follow my channel will know I've been covering the news, not just the coronavirus unfolding tragedy, but also associated market collapses. So I'm excited to take a look at the scientific side of the practices surrounding the coronavirus. It seems that these are, by and large, good pieces of advice when you're out in public. It is best to keep a social distance from strangers, and keeping clean is always a good thing. So, yeah, I think at this stage, if things continue this way, it's probably just going to become another seasonal affliction, possibly far more serious than what we've seen before. If the preliminary tests that have been carried out on the genetic material suggest that it's like super evolved to do a lot of damage to people, but also remain malignant, which is why your common cold today is also a coronavirus.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of the scenarios, and I actually have these mathematical tools to analyze it and say, is it possible this goes away relatively quickly, a cure comes out, and the worst is behind us, which almost no one is saying. Almost all the experts are saying the worst is ahead of us, even if a cure does come out. But we're actually going to look at some of these mathematical models, and I have some special software that will allow us to play around with numbers and do different variants, which is actually very similar to what Church of Entropy have been talking about related to other things. We wanted to create mathematical models, but so let me read this from my father's medical office. Thank God my dad, keeping his office open. Washington Family Medicine. Update to office protocols due to COVID-19. In effort to minimize the risk of exposure to COVID-19, Washington Family Medicine has made some changes to our protocols to better accommodate our patients. We're asking patients who are experiencing symptoms of coronavirus, fever, shortness of breath, cough, to call one of the hotlines set up specifically to answer your questions about coronavirus and advise you in receiving care below the local numbers. We have set up a triage station outside of our suite doors to help determine which patients are okay to enter our suite and which patients should seek treatment elsewhere. We have designed a time period from 12 to 2 each day for our patients over 65 who are not showing signs of illness to come in for routine matters. We have already implemented a rigorous cleaning routine between patients, but have set aside a time from 11:45, 12 each day to do a deep clean of all areas, including the waiting room, exam rooms, bathrooms, as well as any highly touched surfaces. And also minimizing the areas within the office where patients may go, reducing potential exposure to other patients and staff. After checking in, we offer the option for a patient to wait for their appointment in their car, and we will call their cell phone when it is their turn to come in. This minimizes the amount of patients in the waiting room. We also encourage patients to space out in the waiting room, avoiding close contact. We have the ability to push the intake process to a cell phone, eliminating the need to use the intake pad in the office. In the event of the intake pad is used, we are wiping it down with disinfectant wipes before and after each patient who uses it, and also have gloves available for an added layer of protection. We have set up protocols for our staff, such as daily temperature monitoring, hand washing requirements, clothing requirements, and personal protection equipment. These are just some of the things we are doing to help protect you, the patient, and us, the staff. As of right now, these protocol modifications are in effect for the next 2 weeks, but will be extended and modified as needed. Our goal is to continue treating our patients for routine medical matters and refer those patients who may be experiencing symptoms of coronavirus to the professionals who are prepared to test and treat the virus. Thank you for your patience and understanding during this uncertain time. We appreciate you. Okay, so that's my father's notification, who will be maintaining his office open during this time. And we're going to look more into, so my father is keeping his office, in theory, just a family medical practice free of coronavirus, meaning that if you think you have coronavirus, you shouldn't go to your family doctor. You should seek emergency care or home care. But the risk of just being in public, and especially people who are sick or might be elderly that need to do things like see the doctor, that you could maintain your medical office in a way where people don't fear they're going to get infected. And we're going to look into, I have some material on how you actually would conduct a medical practice where people are infected. In fact, saying you have doctors who are treating coronavirus infected people. It's not like, like I showed from the first video. If you take proper safety precautions, you could treat coronavirus infected people, but that the hospitals have to divide up, and that, so my father's not going to be, at least God forbid, hopefully not. It's possible if it breaks out further, but he doesn't plan on treating coronavirus infected patients. And if God forbid people do, he's just a family doctor, and they'll probably be referred to a specialist who specializes in it. And because I didn't go to synagogue this week, I pray together. Thank God, at least 20 doctors. I don't know how they're handling it. A lot of these, doctors, dentists own their own private practices. That professor of epidemiology who even wrote a textbook on epidemiology, because synagogues closed, I did get to, talk to him a few minutes today and shoot a few questions to him. So I'm not sure. I would assume that what my father's doing is pretty common to what your average family doctor is doing, and or specialist even who's not specializing in infections or dental offices or something. You shouldn't. They in fact in Michigan and most places have forbid any non-essential surgeries or even dental procedures. So your dentist can't give you a cleaning, maybe even like a filling. I don't know if it's not like immediately pressing. And that could be, people could be in pain or whatever. So we'll talk about that also, what's considered essential or non-essential. So anything you want to add in, Jennifer, until I go back to these slides?
Yeah, what you just said reminded me of the question I had to myself: what are the dentists going to do? And it's kind of a question of whether the service they provide is essential. I guess they would be reduced to working only on emergency cases for the most part, under higher security restrictions.
Well, I don't know if security is the right word, but you could. I'm going to show the material. You could be a doctor to patients with coronavirus and care for them. Like, you could probably perform a dental procedure on someone who has coronavirus without getting infected. But as of now, that's not what they want to be doing. They want to slow the spread down. So they're just saying if it's not essential, you can't do it. And I don't know if you're affiliated or associated with doctors online that or you've heard about people that are in some sort of field where they're a public figure and need to continue their operation through this crisis, and how they're dealing with it. Are you familiar with anyone who's been talking like that?
Yeah, they're just going to keep on working as hard as they always did, and they'll probably be the last to be sent home if they do end up shutting places down. As far as I know, they're working just as much, if not more, than usual.
Okay, so let me submit some material. It's longer. Okay, so here's the World Health Organization, all their information, and let me put this on screen share. Okay, so get the screen share going. Okay, so just if people want the official from the World Health Organization, here's the technical guide by topic. So they have a whole bunch of so to say their official reports and protocols and advice for how to get through this. I'm not going to be going through any of their material, but I just thought I'd document it for anyone that wasn't familiar with it and is looking for more information. We're going to be looking at this maybe in detail. This is funded by Jack Ma. So I think we got Yuan in the chat. So Jack Ma from Alibaba, his charities have produced a handbook on COVID-19 prevention and treatment. And as I said, doctors can perform, you can treat patients with coronavirus and not get infected. Through physics, I've been like nanotechnology centers and worn suits like that, not for medicine because I was scared of, although like radiation areas, visited like nuclear power plants or particle accelerators. But I didn't have to, but a nanotechnology center where I had to wear it, not for me, but to protect the equipment from getting particles of dust in it. I'm not sure. Have you ever worn a suit like this for any like physics, nuclear or nanotechnology reasons, or even medical?
No, the closest I came was that there were it was like a sealed box with some inbuilt gloves to handle.
Oh yeah, all
technology.
Yeah, all research does, and that's not to. Usually that's not to protect you. That's to protect what you're working with. Sometimes if you're working with noxious chemical, but yeah, all like chemistry labs and research centers have those. I have a lot of pictures on my Facebook I could dig up, but usually because they're a special sealed chamber and you don't want to let any air in, so they have like two openings with these gloves that you could stick in and work with the inside the sealed chamber. But so the concept would be different in physics, but the idea, and I'm going to go through this later. This isn't the first one I want to go through, but I just wanted to mention it. And anyone in the chat or Yuan that wants to read through this, too big. I can't even put it in the chat. It's so long. Okay, but whatever, you could probably just search it. Handbook of COVID-19 Prevention and Treatment from the Zhejiang University School of Medicine. Okay, so here is this calculator that we're going to look at later. Maybe I'll do a little, now. So I think I had this set. So here it has a population of about 7 million. And, the time till intervention. So if you're looking, okay, so this is how many days till intervention. So I guess it's from the first death, and I don't mean it's the first death of period. So if you're talking from the beginning of when it taught China, from the beginning of when it hits your area. So I think it's from when it's the beginning of it hits your area. So I'm not sure if the intervention, I'd have to look on how to work it, but you see, like, obviously the quicker you intervene, the smaller the number. There's other factors. This idea of reproduction number, which is how many people does the coronavirus usually infect from one infected person. That if one, so we're going to see the exact numbers that, it's on average, they're estimating 2 to 2.5 right now. So one person has it, it's likely they're going to spread it from 1 to 2.5 people. But for in terms of outbreaks, you could play around with these numbers. Let me put this one in the chat, so if anyone wants to play around with that, while I do some of the more slides. But I just wanted to show this now so people could be thinking mathematically. Here's the length of incubation period. How long does it take to transmit it? So obviously, how long? I'll check more. I don't want to say incorrectly what transmission time is. Like, here's duration. Patient is infectious. So if it's a very short time or a very long time, obviously it's a very long time, it's going to be a bad sign. If it's a short time, and these are usually, we have no control over it. So these are just traits of the virus itself that would cause these things. Besides for our intervention time and the size of the population, all of this is completely determined by the virus. And I was playing chess earlier in the horde tournament. You really think like the virus. To beat the virus, you have to think like the virus, and to think as the virus is a living being. Kind of like JF in his debate with Stephen Molyneux. The virus is basically living organism according to some ideas that's goal is to reproduce. And so the whole reason the coronavirus is doing what it's doing is for its own self-replication. And so I'm not sure if you want to add something in, and otherwise I really have a whole bunch of slides. This is an important topic, and God forbid people are dying. And let me let Jennifer talk a minute while I show these statistics of God forbid how serious this is.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's ultimately a question of replicator survival. There's also the question of like an environmental balance. That's can think of it in terms of a coevolution, right? Like bees and flowers. There's a coevolution there in the sense that bees need the flowers to live, and then the flowers come to depend on the bees to transmit their genetic material. And you can look at viruses as having not exactly identical, but a similar sort of interfacing with human will to replicate. And it's possible that the virus DNA exchange that goes on during the immune response, it's after the first attack and subsequent to the... Anyway, it's an ongoing thing. Basically, there's a mutual rewriting of DNA between the animal organism and the virus organism. And that appears to be a viable pathway for what you call microevolution, because there's a way to update the software of the animal mind to include information about the virus mind, if you want to call it that. It's the virus's replication strategy. So basically, this virus appears to be so dangerous because it's like highly evolved to be transmissible human to human, as well as do a lot of damage, because there's quite a long period between the time when the virus starts to reformat your flesh to when your flesh ultimately is triggered through your mind to have an immune response, which can cause the immune response to be so overwhelming that it is eventually going to cause death. So this is the idea with what you call anaphylactic shock. So the body recognizes something you eat as an allergen and attempts to destroy the allergen, but actually destroys itself in the process. So the swelling and so forth, the coughing, loss of breath and so forth, those are that's your immune system responding to something it recognizes as bad, but not responding to it in an optimized way.
Look at this chart.
Yeah.
It's straight up, and he's saying, God forbid, you're looking at this trend. It's going to be a few million by next week. So like, unless something miraculously happens, like it's going to be a few million by next week. I mean, just look at that chart.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to know if the data we're getting is valid, because still a complete lockdown going on in Wuhan, right? They've got video feeds on YouTube of Wuhan right now, and it's a total ghost town. So,
well, I mean, you're talking New York City, you're talking Detroit. Like I'll show the Michigan numbers in a second. I showed this one before, and I said I'm not a I'm not a biologist, but you see the coronavirus. Now there's hundreds of them, and there's hundreds of them. So it's unclear whether they're all lethal or these various strains. And you're mentioning usually when viruses mutate. I'll put this in the chat if anyone's more scientific bound. But usually when they mutate to more benign versions. But the coronavirus, that's not the case. They're maintaining deadly versions, and so it's unclear whether this is because these versions are more potent for different races and ethnicities in different climates, or whether possibly all of these versions largely existed before, and in a conspiracy that, like, God forbid, if it was a man-made bioweapon, that they actually pre-made hundreds of coronaviruses. They didn't just make one coronavirus. They made maybe even millions of them. God forbid, in order to be able to get past the immune system as many people as possible. But you see that it is according to the theory of popular science, it is mutating quickly and expanding and mutating as it travels. So it's a different version of coronavirus that different people are getting in different regions. So let me just show these Michigan numbers to see how serious this is, and I don't know when they're going to update it next. So now in Michigan they have it at 787. They're just updating these numbers once a day, and so they updated a few hours ago and won't update it again till tomorrow. So it's, God forbid, it's almost certainly higher now. But you could see Oakland County is where I live, 229 confirmed cases. The suburbs of Detroit, Wayne County is where Detroit is, 349 cases in the county that Detroit's in. 248 of those are in the city itself. My dad's medical office is in Macomb County. There's 101 confirmed cases there. And if you think where the capital is, that Lansing is the capital of Michigan, and so there's much less cases all through the state. It's generally the confirmed cases are centering around urban clusters. And if you see these New York Times statistics now, if you've been following this map, now the U.S. is in bright orange, and the China's almost back to normal. These numbers are staggering. Consider when we looked at this last week, where there's 13,000 deaths, and Italy close to 5,000. You could see the red with it spreading to more than 1,000 people for almost 2 weeks now, like in China, where to spread to thousands of people for a period of a few weeks. So if you assume that's what's going to happen here in the U.S., that it's probably going to it's probably going to hit a lot more people, maybe millions of people, God forbid, looking at the numbers. But it doesn't appear to be slowing down anywhere besides the Far East, like Korea and maybe Japan, and maybe we'll discuss why those numbers are different. But like Italy already up 50,000, Spain 25,000, over 1,300 dead, Iran 1,500 dead, Germany, not sure they have more cases to death. So there's discrepancies in the statistics. In the UK, they're up 5,200 dead. So God forbid, you could see these numbers. Michigan, unfortunately, has like the fifth most cases, and just to show the Jerusalem Post, wherever you are, maybe in India, it's unclear. It's starting to hit India. How bad it's going to hit India, we'll see. But Israel's got their first death, God forbid, 883 cases, with 15 in serious condition. And population-wise, Israel is in fact smaller than Michigan. So anything you want to add in, and otherwise I'll start going to these slides.
No, go ahead. I'm more interested to talk about the cities and the military vehicles that have showed up there. So I hope we'll get to that at some point.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to have a very jam-packed information session, public study session. You could even come back, I guess, if you want to just ramble, but you're happy to stick around, or you could even interrupt me if you have something.
I'll just listen in for now, Doovovid. No problem. I'm enjoying it.
Okay, so here's just some random more information. I couldn't find any slides, but just out of Ireland to show, this is kind of universal. And here we're talking about support for businesses during the quarantine. So, Ireland, first case February 29th, schools close March 12th, pubs close March 15th, priority shopping hours for the elderly March 16th, and that's when this was published. So, you have the government strategy talking about layoff, short-term work. I'm not going to talk too much about the economics of it, but I wanted to just show one slide and do from Ireland, because just show how this is affecting everywhere. And you're going to start seeing these things in this area, like America, where they're considering like a Yang type program. Talk to your bank, get your finances in order, figure out what you're going to be able to do and not able to do. There are probably programs in your area that might offer loans or grants. So, look at Ireland. They just like the U.S. is having a bailout package. They're having a bailout package, for your business. And maybe it's a bad idea to take loans out of your business during the coronavirus shutdown or something. But you see, interest. That's what they're recommending to the people. It's possible that your insurance could cover this if you have really good insurance that covers pandemics and outbreaks. So, this is the Ireland bureaucracy with your local enterprise office. The U.S., the bureaucracy, maybe business chamber, whoever is going to handle it. So layoffs, there's going to be a lot of layoffs in the U.S. We've seen these numbers. I'm not going to, do too much on that. Okay, because there's so much to get to, let me just avoid the economics. So there's a lot to get to, and maybe, God forbid, this looks like it's going to be going on a few months. So maybe I'll have a separate stream talking about the economics of it. So let's just stick to the science. So here's a doctor, infectious disease, put together some slides. Overview, symptoms, comparisons to other viruses, spectrum of the disease, the mechanism of how it's received and injures, strategies for identification, prevention, and treatment. Okay, so there's 6 known coronaviruses known to infect humans. So I'm not a biologist, but they have their genera, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, ironically. So I use those things for all types of things. So that's exact nomenclature. I'm not an expert of it. These already were discovered, the first ones going back to the 1960s. They cause about 30% of colds, with rare reports of pneumonia in patients who had viral infections or were immunocompromised. 2002, you have SARS. 2004, you have HCoV, which caused pneumonia and bronchitis. 2005, caused pneumonia in young children, 1.5% of cases of adult respiratory distress syndrome. Then you had MERS, like the camel disease in 2012 in the Arabian Peninsula. That was very rare but fatal. Those are examples of ones they call zoonotic, that transfer from animal to animal, as well as human to human transmission. So I'm sure you're seeing these pictures all over the place, and you need a biologist, what's an E protein, what's an S protein, what's an M protein. So I might get a little more into it, but you can see how close it is to the influenza vaccine, the influenza virus that operates in a very similar fashion. So here you see, from early March, the dates. So, we're seeing this all over the place, China, so the updated maps, obviously, the places are fastly overtaking China. So this is slides were made a week ago. So what if you get infected with the coronavirus? So we've seen this, the symptoms, compare those to the seasonal flu. So all of the symptoms of coronavirus are the same with the seasonal flu. However, the seasonal flu a lot of times has more symptoms. So it's just take note of that. Incubation period, symptomatic, about 2 weeks. We'll see more of this transmission, contact, droplet, stool, airborne. So it's unclear, God forbid, whether this is airborne or not. If this does turn out to be airborne, you might see these quarantines getting even worse. Airborne isolation. These are some of the medical. We'll talk more about this. So, comparison between coronavirus, cold, and flu. These slides. I'll put these in the chat when I put this in the chat. So, if people are watching and want to look back or see those. So, here are numbers you hear people talking about. So CDC, this is just in America. So you're saying like almost 20% of Americans get the flu each year. It is extremely common, and almost 5-10% of Americans might even see a doctor because of that. And so you have hospitalizations and deaths. So in comparison, look at this. So how does the COVID compare to other outbreaks? Okay, so not going to read all these numbers. People want to see that, they could look at it on their own. Unless something stands out, or Jennifer, something stands out to you, look at it. So here's your coronavirus, and I guess you have your different kinds, and some of them are more deadly than others. So the ones here in the red are more deadly, or the color spectrum, and then also unfortunately using the same colors, the symptoms to say, of the various ones, and the red ones being the more deadly symptoms that could come from these. Okay, so here's your kind of model for what it looks like. So it has this receptor binding domain, and it mediates the interaction with the host cell receptor. So I just showed the New York Times article last week. So this week I'm trying to give a little bit more of the biochemistry, and God forbid, as this goes on, we'll probably going to get down to the atoms. The Church of Entropy, we'll use their services as some more of the physics becomes known. But as of now, we're not quite there. But maybe next week, God forbid, if especially if these trends continue. But okay, it binds to the receptor of a nearby host, cleaves to the spike, which releases the spike fusion peptide, facilitating virus entry. So it's basically a trick. It's created its spike that looks exactly like a receptor that a certain protein in our gastroendocrine tract usually takes. But once it gets in there, it it's really like a spike, and then somehow it's going to penetrate our cell membrane and take over. So we're going to see a little bit more about it. And actually, it's actually fascinating that it'll use our own cell material. So it completely takes over the cell, and through its RNA will take over the proteins and take over the function of our cell. And then it'll use the proteins in our cell to produce the components for the replications of its RNA that our cell also makes for it. So it's actually fascinating, how this works. And if you think of, God forbid, like group evolutionary strategy. So this is its evolutionary strategy. Saying that this is the evolutionary strategy that this virus has chosen, and so we'll talk more about that when we talk more of the karma and philosophy. But I think in terms of evolutionary strategy, it's a good understanding of how to look at this. And so ACE2 is this protein that exists, I guess, in multiple mammals, not just humans, and that's why this because it binds to this common ACE2 protein that exists in the gastroendocrine tract of not just humans but other mammals, is why it could transfer from animal to animal. So it says cytopathic effects start 96 hours in incubation as cilia stop functioning. So there's more information here. We're almost getting down to a molecular level of what's going on. So just see some of these. I encourage people to look more into it. I spent a lot of time researching this, but like I don't have a PhD in biology. I did take quite a bit, biochemistry and various things, but there's a lot of information here. So you can see these slight variations, and probably next week will be even more biochemistry week. God forbid if the projections are right, and next week it's even worse than exponentially worse in probably millions of cases. Next week, we'll try to do the biochemistry of it. So here's your type damage to the immune system. So here's on the bottom left corner, you see the coronavirus. The cell thinks that it's getting the nutrients that it gets, but it's in fact it's a trick. The coronavirus just has a spike out that looks like the nutrient the cell wants, and then once it hooks it, the cell has a method with its other proteins of penetrating the cell membrane, entering it. Then it releases its RNA, and then the RNA enters the proteins of that replicate RNA, and it'll start replicating these proteins, and then those virus proteins will direct our cells, our ACE2 protein cell and our gastroenterocrine tract cell to not only replicate the cell's RNA for it, but to make the proteins that will make millions and millions of the vessels that the new coronaviruses will carry. Are you there, Jennifer? Are you familiar with? Did you know that's how viruses work?
Yes, I'm aware. I've been doing a bit more research into the precise mechanism lately.
Yeah, I mean, you might have even been taught that in like elementary school biology. So even like a diagram like this in like third grade biology, whenever the first time you take biology, it's conceivable like you were shown these type diagrams, and like so next week maybe we'll get even more into the biochemistry and physics of these reactions. But this is in terms of the cure of the process, and then obviously the physics, the physics of what's going on here, the biochemistry, and then the physics and biochemistry, what happens when it's outside of the body, and just to start to understand any virus's evolutionary strategy versus and it's possible that COVID-19 generally has the same evolutionary strategy as any virus.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that it's RNA based, which appears to make it a little bit, seems to be able to replicate itself easier at the primary stages because it's RNA based. Because RNA is simpler than DNA. It has about half as many atoms.
Yeah, we'll look more at these, like who's at risk and the symptoms, and see exact percentage. I have better slides than this than that one on other slideshows. So diagnostics, there's different blood tests, swabs, CT scans, and look. This picture is not clear what the advantages of them or what the percent identification versus swab to a CT scan, or how accurately can we even test for it. And there's quite a few of these things. So they say like even after a person has been cured of it, so to say, they got the sickness and they no longer have symptoms, but the virus is still in their intestinal tract, and usually the person's under quarantine till there's no more evidence, and then we'll see how much of the virus is no more evidence. But to think like the size of the virus, they say that an infected person, a post-infected person, infected person could have more, but a person who survived the infection, just have the remnants of the dead bacteria in its lungs, has on average 10 to the 8th coronaviruses per milliliter of their fluid. So that's an exceptionally high amount. That's 10 million coronaviruses per milliliter. Okay, so here's the basic advice that you're seeing over and over. I'm not going to go over it. Therapeutic triage strategies. So this we're going to get more into. I have other graphs that are possibly better for this, for how you're operating medical facilities, taking temperatures, how you could test. Like my father's office, can you just give someone a thermometer, a triage outside, and if they don't have a fever, so to say, if they have a fever, say, I'm sorry, you can't come in, you have to go to a facility that assumes you might be infected, as opposed to they don't have a fever, they still might be infected, but the chance is much less, or the likelihood that it was spread, because God forbid, as these viruses have made more and more copies of itself in order to be expelled through our mucus and mucus droplets, that it's going to cause more and more damage, making the person more and more sick. So if a person hasn't developed a fever yet, they could be contagious, but hopefully the normal strategies of hygiene and cleanliness would allow a person to successfully work with a person, that in that case, various testing, and not all these are clear enough, and so coronavirus can be defeated by our normal immune system, just in terms of the cells recognizing that something's going on, something has intercepted our cell. And, as we talked last week, just from the New York Times article, that's actually what causes death in the person. The coronavirus is just doing its replication strategy and does not necessarily intend to cause death in the person, if you could, personify like intention. But the coronavirus, the death, so to say, is a side effect of the coronavirus's replication, as is sickness in the regular immune system. So hopefully, I think I have some good graphics. Reducing risks, sleep, ironically, large amounts of sleep has been most identified with building up immunity and immunity to viruses. So if you are feeling infected and want to beat it, or any virus in general, get lots of sleep. That's the best advice to beating a virus. And actually, studies have shown that you should be asleep midnight to 1, as the immune system seems to work best at that night. But refer to those studies and consult your local doctor, obviously. So anything you want to add before I go to the next one?
Just thanks very much for putting the material together. It's very much appreciated.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of it, so we'll keep it going. So here is Dr. Safi, Department of General Surgery at Nangarhar University Teaching Hospital. I think this is in China. So, we've said this many times, coronavirus is a larger family of viruses that cause a wide range of illness, from the common cold to more severe diseases. This one's a new strain that has not been previously identified in humans. So, these statistics are outdated. Incubation period, like what mentioned on the statistic, so there's quite a discrepancy here, 1 to 12.5 days. And if you look on, our mathematical statistic, like that could mean a huge difference in saying this was already, maybe a week old, maybe we know more now, but, huge, median 5 to 6 days, incubation period 1 to 12.5 days. Estimates will be more refined as more data becomes available. What is her name? Transmission, like, can it be transmitted from the air? The modes of transmission. We know droplets sprayed by affected individuals, contact with patients' respiratory secretions, contaminated surfaces, fomites, and equipment. Airborne spread is not documented so far, but has not been ruled out. Symptoms: early stage fever, respiratory symptoms, cough, shortness of breath, runny nose, weakness, malaise, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headache. Advanced stage: all the earlier symptoms plus pneumonia and bronchitis. People most at risk of infection are those who are in close contact with a COVID-19 patient or care for a COVID-19 patients. So this is the exact same slide we saw in the other one, comparing the symptoms of a coronavirus, cold, and flu. In fact, I apologize. All of these are public slides, so I'll put this in the link. I'll put the link in the chat for people who want to follow along or miss something, you want to go back and read it. So primary prevention is to avoid exposure to the virus. The assumption is if you're exposed to the virus will attach to one of these ACE2 proteins and will spread, and maybe your immune system will get it. But the assumption is that, yes, if you are exposed to this virus, you have an extremely high chance that it will attach to an ACE2 receptor and multiply. So respiratory hygiene, the regular stuff that are in all of these. Medical masks. The WHO does not recommend that people wear a medical mask in community settings if they do not have respiratory symptoms, as there is no evidence available that usefulness to protect people who are not ill. However, masks may be worn in some countries according to local cultural habits. Individuals with fever and or respiratory symptoms are advised to wear masks, particularly in endemic areas. It is mandatory to wear a medical mask in public in certain areas of China, and local guidance should be consulted for more information. Screening and quarantine, people traveling from areas of high risk of infection. So this is already almost old news because we're all basically quarantined now already. So there's a lot to get through. Enforced quarantine, being used now right here in America. Not yet in Michigan. We'll see as this increases. So the monitoring, if you've been exposed to somebody, now you're just saying be careful, saying don't share germs with anyone. Don't trust anybody in terms of sharing germs. Anyone could have this. That's the current recommendation. Returning travelers, forced quarantine, as opposed to the situation here in America where it's basically you're reaching almost forced quarantine to everybody. Secondary prevention. Isolation of suspected people, confining. We'll see if that happens here in America. If the numbers increase and there happens to be, hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are known to be infected, and the deaths just keep on coming. So as of now, that's probably next week. So if God forbid the coronavirus won't be here next week, but if the experts are right, the stuff to cover for next week. Healthcare workers caring for patients with COVID-19 disease. So have a whole list of gloves, medical masks, goggles, face shields, gown, procedures, and we'll cover more of that because it's going to be important, and hopefully this will be useful. If you are a medical provider, you're not going to be watching Doovoid stream. I'm sure you have official places of contact that are providing you the best practices. Okay, so because I've done so many of these, a lot of this is repeating. I just wanted to go over this quite a few times so people would really understand what's happening. And I pulled these different slides because some of them had better slides or information in different areas. So here we see hand washing. Before you touch the patient, before you gotta wash your hands constantly. Like if you're a nurse, like you're saying, not just like before you deal with the patient. Like basically after you touch anything, you have to wash your hands again. You see different strategies using your elbow, paper towel. We're going to see a lot more of these, and some of these have better graphics. So here would be if you were caring for people, God forbid, with COVID-19, and you knew they had it, and you knew that it was spreading. And it's interesting, this procedure. See the book, a gown, and you only have one glove. There's procedures we'll see in the other one with like the double pair of gloves that you put on one pair of gloves, and then you put on another pair of gloves on top of that, and then you use that pair of gloves to put on everything else, and then you put the gown on, and then so the point is going to be at the end, once you first thing you do is you take off your dirty pair of gloves, and then you use the pair of gloves under it to take off everything else after it, and then you finally take off that second pair of gloves. So, I mean, the procedures for not getting infected are quite intricate, and God forbid, like coronavirus, if it has around a 2% death rate, doctors are probably generally older, but let's say it has about a 2% death rate. Presumably, even if it had 100% death rate, you could follow these procedures and treat patients who had the virus, even though it spread. So, I mean, we do have procedures. Your average person is never going to go through this. But if you are a doctor and trust the science, in theory, yes, you not only should you have to, this is your duty as a doctor to treat patients. And these are the current protocol procedures for how to stay safe doing it. So, generally you're saying there's going to be areas, people that exclusively treat this. Like my dad's not treating coronavirus. You want to keep anyone who has coronavirus away from those type offices and send people with coronavirus to people who are going to specialize it in order to limit the number of people that, God forbid, if you follow the protocol, could you still get infected? God forbid, yes. And, it's difficult to follow the protocol perfectly or something. Maybe you pick your nose or something, you forgot. So you got to be careful in saying, if you're a doctor, it could be, dressed like that for hours and hours at end. So like not picking your nose for a few minutes is one thing, but like not picking your nose for 5 hours could be rather difficult. And, so the procedures about like laundering this stuff and various things, I'm going to, that's actually going to be covered again in other slides. So, go over the different spill management in various things. Here, JF, everyone's talking about these things, antivirals, lopinavir and ritonavir, some confirmation, the one President Trump had mentioned, and I actually got some of that from my dad, who is dealing with, who is out there right now working as a doctor, and he got, so he, I believe has taken some sort of suppressant. I'm not sure, or God forbid, I can't give over private medical data, but consult your local expert, and if you are a medical provider, you might be taking one of these suppressants to limit your chances. Saying consult your local medical association or best practices. Obviously, this was probably strictly regulated and controlled by the law. And, as you saw with Trump and Fauci and these various politics that we'll talk about after cover this huge amount of information. So there's dosages. So discharge. So if the laboratory results are negative, discharge, and we'll look at how you discharge people. How, what does it mean to be healed from it? How long does it take them to be discharged? So just cleanliness things, bleach and various things. So I wanted to cover some of these things because you're saying there are a lot of people out there that are currently weathering the storm. And so I got two more. I got this longer one that's going to have might be quicker because a lot of them will skip because we went through similar ones, but that one's got some really good pictures and documentation. And then the official Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So you have anything you want to add?
No, I'm just listening in for now.
Okay. Well, did you want to ramble? How long have we been going? It's been over an hour. So if you want to, you'll give a few minute monologue on kind of your thoughts on coronavirus and give my mouth a rest and maybe in the...
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so I mean, we don't really know a lot right now. We have some general models on how viruses propagate. I've heard some commentary that I don't think is a good direction to go in, that viruses aren't real or that we don't know how viruses work. If you're unsure about that, just look up scanning tunneling microscopes of images that actually render viral cells for you so you can see the basic shape. There's basic models of how they propagate their genetic material, and these things can be established. That then you have to get into the question of what are we establishing when we're actually doing these analyses. That's a little bit more complicated because maybe
Jennifer,
go ahead.
If I take 5, you could hold it down.
Hopefully some people in the audience can ask some specific questions. Otherwise, I can just talk a little bit about. Yeah, I can go for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Doovovid. No problem. Okay.
Yeah, if you try to keep it, if it's possible, like exclusive to coronavirus, and maybe engage the chat and just because I was out for like an hour, take some more medicine, give my voice a rest, and get prepared to do like another 30 minutes to finish off there's actually a lot to do. So I'll be back in like 5.
Hey guys, hope you've enjoyed the coverage so far. So the major takeaways from this, like I always say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I was in the JF chat earlier. I believe it was Scathy who was saying it about the, what is it called? The placebo effect being really good. And, there's a lot of truth to that. Our beliefs do impact the outcomes of things in the material world to a far greater degree than most people would be comfortable acknowledging. And that's not to say you can, will yourself to not get sick if the circumstances dictate it. And the virus, temporarily gets ahead in the evolution race. Yeah, that can happen for the same reason that some children, very young children, suffer and die due to illness. That's not necessarily because of something they did in a past life. Sometimes it's just bad luck, because it's not just humans on the planet. It's a rivalry between the wills to replicate between all sorts of different organisms, isn't it? We don't really know a lot. We have lot of conflicting information, a lot of finger pointing going on. So it's important to take a broader stance on things and try to maybe look behind the messaging to a greater narrative. What you can do in the meantime is just really put your health at number one. I mean, if your health is not optimized, you're not in a permanently chilled state of mind with a perfect body, you can do better. And there's a lot of things you can do that really aren't that hard to alter your lifestyle, just to be on a healthier path. For example, taking your largest meal at around lunchtime instead of around supper time. That'll line up your intake of food with your digestive potential. Also, if you're going to drink water, make sure to do it before a meal, not after. Because after the meal, you want to just give your stomach the space it needs to do its digestive processes. So what's actually happening when you're getting sick is that normal digestive faculties are being redirected to digest, quote unquote, a virus. And that process can be pretty debilitating, as we all know, but that's essentially what it is. So the more your will is lined up towards an intention of health, the harder it's going to be to deviate it because it has its own momentum, just like in physics. So yeah, you'll still get affected occasionally by viruses and bacteria, but because you're willing yourself towards optimized health and optimized self-esteem, your response, that your immune response will be optimized as well. And that's what a lot of these bad side effects are. They're just immune responses gone haywire. That's even what allergies are. So that's why when they're evaluating or triaging a list of potential treatments, you always have these immune suppressant drugs that make the list. We got a question in the chat from Scathy. What are my thoughts on the impact of spiritual wellness versus physical wellness, mitigating the impact of the virus on the system? Which do I believe pulls more weight? How much is going to pull weight really depends on the origin of the virus. Was it actually engineered to have a particular outcome? Or was it just a, bad batch of bat soup, right? That's going to depend on it. What's clear is that our state of mind has some effect on the ultimate manifestation. And the question is, we just don't know exactly how much. So that's why we always leave the door open for more. It's always good to have a little bit more self-esteem, self-love, self-worth, because that's what's ultimately going to prop up your health, which is what's going to allow you to use your energy towards acquisition of greater knowledge, which is ultimately going to make you enlightened. But if your body has to reroute its energies towards other things, from fighting off a virus to powering a clunky ego, well, you're going to have less residual energy left over to deal with the big questions. Once again, it's a overall life philosophy of health that you want to embody. Making the time to do things that are good for you overall. There are a lot of options for that. Now, if we go to the Ayurvedic perspective of it has its own philosophy, and one of the aspects of that philosophy is not to make any lifestyle changes quickly. Okay, so you get these try-hards on the fad diets. So that, according to our philosophy, basically is a guarantee to fail. So when someone is, being ultra try hard and taking on, biting off more than they can chew, so to speak, that sort of tells me that they're not serious, because you have to build it up gradually. It's a momentum thing. If you try to build momentum too quickly, you could spin your wheels, right? Your consciousness is a type of machine, and if you're going to optimize it, well, it's going to take a little bit of time. But it starts with having the intention. And then when you have the intention, you can gradually make better decisions as to your overall health. So what I was suggesting earlier in the JF chat was that people get familiar with cooking with ghee, which is clarified butter. Very delicious. Pretty easy to make. Just put some butter in a pot and let it heat up. Not too hot. You don't want it to burn, right? But it's got to boil for long enough to form a precipitate. And that's basically all the, well, you'll see what it is. You can even taste it. It has like a weird kind of caramelly sweet smell. It basically precipitates all the unwanted parts of the butter, leaving only the superior byproduct of the butter, which is called ghee. It's quite delicious. And then you can take ghee, heat it up in a pan. So when you're normally heating up butter in a pan, you know how it goes. That's because it's a mechanical mixture of things that have different boiling points. So like part of it's boiling and other parts of it aren't boiling. So you're getting this like sizzling effect between the different elements of the mechanical mixture. That doesn't happen with ghee. It just melts like all at once. It's really neat. And then you can add turmeric to that. And what that's going to do is dye the ghee. And that's, once it starts to dye the ghee, i.e. change its color, that's when you know the curcuma is becoming bioavailable. So you can look up curcuma. This is actually something with quite a bit of studies behind it. Basically, broad spectrum antifungal, anti-inflammatory. I believe there's some research that has shown that it can actually diminish your chances of cancer. But like all that research, you have to be kind of careful because they may not be taking all the variables into account and may have misplaced causality. So you always have to take those studies with a grain of salt. But hey, it can't hurt. Just like taking a vitamin C tablet per day can't hurt. There are, again, a lot of studies and a lot of counter assertions about the utility of vitamin C, but it can't hurt. And just as Scathy said earlier in the JF chat, the mere fact of taking the vitamin C pill is an act of self-love, which ultimately contributes to self-esteem, which improves your immune response, which is what we often describe as the placebo effect. So if this is a biologically engineered virus, like, insta-kill type thing, and I'm not saying that it is, well, we're not going to have as much power through our will to change the fact that there's going to be a lot of casualties, but we don't really know. So it's just best to be as optimistic as possible, but also take as many precautions as possible. The optimism actually comes from taking the precautions. All right, so I got a question in the chat. Apologies to Doovoid if this is not quite on topic here, but thoughts on the stage of grieving wherein an agent begs and bargains with God. Do I believe this could have any sort of physical implications, i.e. the underlying will interacting? Okay, well, death can cause cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is something that's explored in depth in my model. But basically, the way my model looks at it is that humans are attempting to minimize cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is that which happens when there's a conflict between your expectation and reality. And on some level, we have a sort of juvenile nature where we don't expect people to die. And then when they do, it's like, oh no, I never thought that would happen. It's because they've never died before. So it's like in your lifetime, the person who dies has never died before. So it's like a shock because you had no context for it happening. And the bargaining with God, that can come from a great many places, right? It's such a sort of a foreign concept to me to beg with God to intervene on that level. But I guess if you believe you have a personal relationship with a personal God, that means you could curry favor with that God and he might owe you a solid at some point. So maybe that's why people say like, oh, please just give me another chance. I promise I'll be good this time. Could it have a physical implication? Well, yeah, improper thinking and improper behavior always has physical implications, right? Like improper breathing is like a self-reinforcing cycle, where if you're not breathing deeply, then that's causing, I believe what it is an inhibition of calm hormones, and which somehow leads to a release of stress hormones. There's some sort of cycling in there that the shallow breathing, our capacity for shallow breathing is basically like if we need a quick jolt of adrenaline. But what happens is people get stuck in the shallow breathing due to heightened like periods of stress, which causes the adrenaline to be pumping like at all times, which then causes you to become kind of numb to it, which any type of numbness is bad because you want as much sensitivity as possible so that you can use it in the best way possible, because ultimately like that sensitivity is what you reformat into your spiritual virtue. So Doovoid is back. I don't want to get too much off in the weeds, Doovoid. I think I've managed to keep it on topic, and I took a couple of audience questions that were more in the spiritual domain. Back over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wasn't following the chat too much. Okay, Erica's here. If you want to stick around and talk about this after in like half an hour, maybe we'll bring Erica on if she wants. So I was just showing you the New York.
Yeah, sure. Bring anyone you want on. That's cool, Doovoid.
Okay, yeah. After I present it, so like in half an hour, if she's there in the chat. I wasn't following the chat, so here you see this New York Times graphic of new cases, and you see the New York one, God forbid, off the charts, and in Michigan, right up there at the higher states, unfortunately, Illinois, Washington, now including everywhere, percent increase in the last 5 days, over 1,000% increase in New Jersey, New York. So just real humbling statistics there. And I think the New York Times had a nice graphic on like a worst case scenario of so let's see the current numbers, if they're okay. They weren't, I don't think they updated since I checked it last, but I think they had a nice graphic on possible scenarios that could happen. Oops, sorry about that. And you see the effect on the stock market, which I'm not going to be able to talk about today. Okay, so here are the various scenarios playing out. So the one on the left is no controlled measures, the one in the middle is some controlled measures, and the one on the right is severe controlled measures. Saying we're doing something like in the middle, and you're saying with just some control measures, you could have some places with possibly, God forbid, up to 100% infection, depending on if the virus, literally will eventually get you. Like as long as it eventually gets that ACE2 receptor in you, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Or maybe like certain people, just whatever reason, the virus won't catch them and won't be able to hook into their ACE2 receptor, and that's something it will take long to study, and you could be the top doctors don't really understand that. But you see, the middle, the mass urban center is really getting hit, and so that's the interesting political ramifications of the red and blue state. That the lockdown, these red areas, the big blue areas that are in lockdown, is where even Michigan, we're not quite in lockdown. Hopefully, we won't be. But these urban centers that are in lockdown, and if you put some numbers to that. Here you're talking new cases per day. So here, right now, we're at about 300,000 cases at March 22nd. And so it's saying at the peak of this thing, the doubling, it's going to get into up to 500,000 new cases per day. So some controlled measures is saying we're going to reach 300,000 cases per day. And even severe controlled measures God forbid, we're still going to probably continue with thousands and thousands of cases per day, maybe even more than 10,000 cases per day. That's why we're doing it. Those are the presumptions. And you're saying if it's a 2% death rate, you're like the flattening the curve thing too. So if it's a 2% death rate and 500,000 new cases per day is, God forbid, 10,000 10,000 people dying per day. And you're saying, but it wouldn't just be 10,000 people dying per day because the hospital service would be overwhelmed. So if you have fine medical care, on average, the death rate is only 2% and like 14% for older people. But if you don't have any medical care available, the death rate might be 10% across the board. It might be 50% for older people and 3 or 4% for even young people or whatever. So that's the bend the curve idea. With the graphs that would show the capacity of the U.S. health system, how many people can we hold in hospitals per day, and then saying, God forbid, the people who aren't going to be able to access doctors. We're looking to hold the measures and apply enough restrictions on society that we do not surpass the capacity of our hospitals. That's generally the strategy that the U.S. is employing. I'm not sure if all countries, but that's the general strategy that we're employing here, that we want to employ just enough restrictions on our daily lives as in order to not overcapacitate the medical system. But there's so many unpredictabilities about the virus. Here you're talking like April. So if you're in a much more secluded area, like Jennifer's saying, she's far away from this. If you look at this map, even by April 1st, a lot of places are just not going to be that hard hit by it, no matter what. But by May 1st or June 1st, it might, if there is no intervention, it'll eventually spread all over. Although the more rural, the more places where people are sparse will always be less affected. So, something to think about. And then it's also saying, God forbid, if you're in quarantine lockdown right now, it could be like this for 3-4 months. Okay, President Trump is praying for a cure, and he thinks, there's going to be a cure. And it's saying like Dr. Fauci, the experts, is saying like, no, you got to be prepared for the long haul, possible 4 months. And, that's why the government's considering like yanking us. And, it could be a disaster. It could lead to the downfall of governments to try to force a quarantine and various things. And it's interesting here, they have these curves per state and, which ones are more likely to, peak earlier or later. And I'm not sure where Michigan is this, because Michigan, I guess, is peaking earlier. And it's saying, okay, right now the estimate here for Michigan is that God forbid, we're not going to peak till the middle of May. And if we do actions like we're doing, we're not going to peak till the middle of July. And it means we're probably not going to be out of this till August or September of these restrictions on our life. Maybe by July we'll be out of quarantine. Like, this is crazy to think about this, but I'm saying like, this is the fact. This is why I'm streaming. This is why I'm trying to give over the information. I'm not a doctor. I can't, saying like, yes, currently right now, it does appear that we are going to be like this for 4 months. And I'm trying to use the best of my knowledge to explain why this is. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Jennifer. You think even in your area, eventually, maybe you're enough sparse or separated where it's just not going to ever come to a worry for you. But even in the closest population dense area, that they too will probably eventually have to go on lockdown in order for it not to spread amongst them.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. I just saw some news coming out of something Bill Gates said, and he thought that the countries that handle the situation well could open in as few as 3 to 6 weeks. So God knows what that actually means. But yeah, it appears to be a little bit of an economic threat there, sort of. And people are moving to take advantage of it, I suppose. But yeah, I don't think things will ever go back to normal after this, Doovovid, honestly. It's caused too many people to ask too many questions that their perceptions have permanently shifted in the process.
So here's in this one lets you control it. So you start April 1st, and that's already 10 days from now. And slowly going up, and you're saying it'll get to 100% infection by August 1st. So if you do nothing, basically everyone's going to have it by August 1st. There's some control measures. And it's interesting because at August 1st, like this, quite a few people are going to have it. That's why I said, like, we're probably going to be until September, and then severe control measures. It's still going to be the worst. Like, some of the experts saying, like, so here, like, quite, the more August 1st, more people have it than at any other time. So, even though just then it might be starting to be on the decline, we could be in this situation for months. So you have to see, like, this strategy of quarantine, how long it's going to last to, the pressure of, the pushback of people being in quarantine. But just saying right now, we don't know how to stop it. Like, the more people die, the more people likely to quarantine. So you just check, this, God forbid, like every few minutes, and these numbers going up really fast. Saying, like, it was outside of China, the deaths a week ago were, like a few thousand. So it's like this is exponential increase. This is like, really, when we talk about statistics and YouTube and the expression going viral, and kind of how they understand social networks is kind of, like the viruses. It's a viral network of expansion, and it's exponential. And saying, God forbid, at the peak of this, they're saying, if we do nothing, you're going to see 500,000 people being infected every day. And, these death numbers would be astronomical in the hundreds of thousands. And even with the controlled measures, so we're going to see, and I'm going to try to look at this one. I just signed up for this, and then right before I started streaming, I got the notification. Have you ever used Statista?
Maybe. I've Googled it a few times. What is it exactly?
I think it's just a web page that collects a bunch of statistics.
Cool. Well, definitely one to bookmark.
Okay, so actually, let me see if this works. So I'll see if this one opens, and I got the Michigan. So do you want to, maybe before I start back into these slides, talk a little bit about the dharma of doctors, people in the public profile that need to put themselves at risk in order to because my more slides are gonna you'll get into wow. Okay, so yeah, this Statistica, and this one is 118. So I had to actually sign up for this one. This information wasn't publicly available. So I guess we should probably cover that. Make my stream. I don't know how much energy you have, but I probably will try to go over that. And so I just got that right now from this site, Statistica. If anyone wants to attempt to try to sign up and get their own. So before I go back to these slides, let's talk a little bit about the dharma of a doctor or a public official that literally has to bear more risk. If you just put it straight up across the board, you got a 2% chance that if you're infected, you're going to die from this. And it's conceivable that you could be in public and deal with people and follow proper health protocol and trust the system and the doctors to keep you uninfected. Like President Trump staff members, like it's reaching the top where you're saying like everybody is at least in touch with people. Like, is it possible President Trump's got a really good immune system, or is it possible like he's been given some secret medicine? I mean, President Trump is probably taking, that'd be my guess, that President Trump is taking, that Hydra, I don't even know what that himself. He's probably taking it himself in order to limit his risk, and plus the, taking people's temperatures.
Chloroquine?
Yeah, chloroquine. So my guess, President Trump himself is probably taking that. And,
we covered that actually some time ago. I believe it was on my first time covering the news. I said that South Korea was using a combination of chloroquine and something else to prevent the likelihood of initial infection. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think my father might be taking that, and President Trump himself is probably taking that. He recommended it, although, that might not be, you have to be careful with rules of disclosure in this type of information and medical information.
Well, what I've heard so far is that a reserve of chloroquine got raided somewhere, was either Italy or Spain, and that there have been anecdotal reports of people poisoning themselves with overdoses of chloroquine in continental Africa. These are what I've heard back so far. So yeah, it's good as long, it doesn't appear that the risk outweighs the benefit, so long as you're taking it in the proper dosage. And that your supply hasn't been raided.
Yes, I'm not going to focus that much on these medicines, but you're saying like I want to talk briefly before. I mean, they are going to be covered in the slides, but I don't have that much.
You want me to talk about Dr. Dharma, right?
Well, I want to talk about the dharma of a person that's required to put their life at more risk. So, like, okay, obviously a doctor, a police officer, a politician, like death threats, or maybe just being Jewish or taking high birth in some form puts you at higher risk. I know my rabbi always jokes, saying, "What's the most dangerous profession?" And firefighter, military. So like rabbi, nothing's more dangerous than being a rabbi. Which statistically, I mean, rabbi is a pretty safe, health safe job. But you have a dharma, in this case, a coronavirus. Besides for your own well-being, your own safety, and your own need to maybe make a livelihood and deal with your personal dharma. So if you just say, if you stay put and don't deal with anybody, social distance, like you're not going to die from this thing. You're not even going to put the 2% risk upon yourself. Very unlikely. I mean, it's possible somehow the virus, like it gets to you, even though you seclude yourself, God forbid. But, so if it's only, if you're younger or you're older, that's, one of the dynamics, caring about older people is, well, it's only a small percent risk for younger people. It's a larger percent risk for older people. So the dharma of people that have to accept quarantine in order to care about their elders. And, maybe tomorrow we'll talk about that, maybe like the, JF and Stephen Molyneux's debate and, kind of like these morals and standards, where they come from. But I don't want to get too derailed on like, what's the origin of morality. But, this, of looking after elders and needing to take sacrifice in our own life for the care of elders, and you may be utilitarian for our own good. Like, really, we want our elders, that we don't want them to die younger. There might be a little selfish thing to like let the whole die, but for our own good, even beyond some sort of duty, even if it wasn't for our own good. And then, besides the professionalism, if you're a doctor or a medical professional or run a grocery store or any of these things, a bank that have been deemed to be vital, that you are required to put yourself at more risk, and saying, we know what's happening, we know the death rate, we know what this virus is doing to people, but doctors and different public people have a dharma obligation to take that risk upon themselves. And then there's going to be the accepted standards of those taking that risk upon themselves in society, for how they make themselves safe as possible, social distancing, standardized practices, like doctors' offices and things the state could regulate that could be relatively uniformly implemented based on the best practices and research of centralized bodies or best evidence. So just thinking that was a ramble before I go on with these slides that might deal with it on a higher level and more from the medical care providers, because I don't think much of my viewership are medical care providers, but probably people who watch either Mirror Church of Entropy are care about the world and the suffering of others, and have a strong sense of dharma and obligation to help other people, especially in their time of need. And because of that, it's our obligation to know as much about this and help other people, inform them about how they're going to be able to get through the next few months of their life under this epidemic. And we're going to talk more about this, but just after I finish these slides, as long as Jennifer has strength, and maybe Erica will join us, and some other people, just like it keeps on being the record warmest year on to date, that these viruses might keep on getting worse and worse, and the practices that we're doing now in terms of social distancing or hygienic or germ transfer could be not like a thing like this one we're going to get over it, but God forbid there'll be a series of viruses and they might keep on getting worse and worse, and man is really going to have to adapt to these series of viruses, or it could be a permanent disruption on globalization. And Jennifer's got our friend the pangolin, and let me see if I could show these pictures.
Talk a little bit about Dr. Dharma before you keep going.
Yeah, and I want to see if I could find these pictures of our friend the pangolin, which as of now is the best bet for the origin of the animal that the coronavirus jumped from. And I had some pictures from I think it was in National Geographic, but we're saying mankind and pangolins can get together. So Jennifer's picture right now, a pangolin, when it's born, it takes about 5 months in the womb, and then the first month it exclusively rides on its mother's back. And so that's a young pangolin riding on its mother's back, which it'll do for about the first month until about 3 months to 5 months, when the penguin will leave its mother and go off to found a family of its own. So that's Jennifer's avatar. So while she's talking about Dharma, I'm trying to find these pictures just so man and pangolin could get along, and actually humans could take the mother type figure for a pangolin that's raised without a parent. You will see that pangolins will actually ride humans like that. So God forbid the horrible karmatic relationship mankind has with the pangolin right now, that saying it is conceivable that pangolins could be like cats or something. Maybe we'll talk about that more probably after I do the medicine. But I thought that's a good lead-in for Jennifer's views on the dharma of this, especially the duty of public people to put themselves at risk.
Well, just to give people a little bit of context, when I talk about dharma, what I'm talking about is an ideal for theocratic governance. And when people talk about specific subject dharma, what they're usually referring to is how close is your practice lining up with your quote unquote destiny. Like, are you 100% of the man you could be, or 90% or 80%? Basically the idea behind personal dharma is that you want to do what you're capable of doing, right? So the idea in a meritocracy is that the people who are the most capable have the most power, but also the most duty, because in a meritocracy, you need a connection between how much power you have and how much duty is associated with that. And if you don't, you get abuse of power, right? So these people who are doctors now, it's a very difficult time for them. We should pray for them in some sense, wish them well, because they're largely compelled to fulfill their life role in a system that has several problems with how information travels within it, because the supreme standard is not truth, it's profits. So that causes a great deal of suffering, and that's sort of where the authority starts to become unraveled. And that's why so many people are suffering, even more than just from the virus. They're suffering from the mental cognitive dissonance of being faced with the fact that their leaders really didn't deal with the situation very well, it would appear, comparatively speaking. And so
well, I get a copyright. I'm not going to get a copyright strike for this. I'm showing the National Geographic, some just pictures of the pangolin in the background. This is what I was mentioning, that I mean, this is the African pangolin. They're likely African pangolins are the ones that are sold in the Wuhan market. But that nature of the baby pangolin to ride on its mother, a man could take the mother figure for an orphan pangolin. So it is possible for pangolins and man to dwell together in harmony. So just showing these in the background. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure where I was, but basically there's a loss of faith in the capacity for this Western-style government to respond adequately to this type of stimulus. It sort of becomes very clear to the degree to which there's very little slack in markets for such an occurrence to really happen, that there's not enough preparedness, and there's basically a breakdown of the distributed information network that the state / de facto theocracy is supposed to embody. So hopefully things will get back on track really soon. And Doovovid, just to let you know, Erica's timing people out in the chat for no reason because she has a problem with me. So maybe you can either mod Rook or unmod Erica, because I don't know, I've got her blocked. I don't want to deal with her shenanigans. So
okay, yeah, if you don't mind, unless someone's you don't need to use that wrench. I'm not going to remove it right away, but take it easy unless someone's doing. I'm more concerned. I'm basically only concerned with the YouTube. I like to keep the chat in a way that's productive and to topic, but I'm mostly concerned with the YouTube rules. So just looking at these National Geographic, like some sort of karma, and we're talking about the evolutionary strategy of the virus or the pangolin, and if it's possible you think that these viruses were either in the stomachs of bats or pangolins and weren't so deadly to them, that there was a virus that spread, but whatever point, for whatever reason, they don't. I don't know if pangolins have the exact same ACE2 protein or something similar, but that it wouldn't have been as deadly in them. So I mean, pangolins are farmed or saved, or I guess certain places in Africa where pangolins live, that these could be actually wildlife preserves. But saying that you can have a friend, you could have a friendly, like a cat or dog. You could have a pangolin, and you could even have a relationship where you feed the pangolin, and I mean that's how you develop. Usually, we're talking about like animal training or something. That's the pangolin when they're curled up in a ball for protection, and you could actually see like lions trying to bite them, or animals, and those shells are pretty rough, and it's kind of like a chain link meal. So it's not like an armadillo. They're only when they curl into a ball does it make that shield. So it's pretty interesting, and then they just have to hold their muscles, and they're anteaters. They have this little tongue that sticks out, and that's like if you've seen an anteater, it's just the scales that and so even a veterinarian in this case would be caring for a sick pangolin. So saying like this is probably the relationship with the pangolin that we would like and prefer to have, and so God forbid, thought I'd show that. Also here I found this video, this interesting video. I guess I'm not sure, this Chinese speaking guy in New York, and he was just showing Chinatown in New York versus Whole Foods, and he's saying like in Chinatown they had relatively pretty prepared, like they knew what they were doing. So it's saying, okay, like we haven't seen these things often, but like in China they have all different, they've seen these things quite often, they're used to dealing with it. So even though there's like a big scare for these products, like in this shop in Chinatown, they have huge amounts of gloves, even whole body suits. And he's saying all types of people are wearing masks and doing the social distancing, and the stores aren't even that much of a problem besides the rice. And even the street vendors in Chinatown are doing the whole social distancing. And then he compares it to Whole Foods, where the people aren't, being as careful about social distancing, and there's discrepancies and stuff being sold. So it's interesting, and you think the cultural response of the Chinese, who are used to dealing with things like this, as opposed to maybe other groups that aren't used to dealing with it. And an adaptive strategy, and the possibility that we might have to get used to dealing with more and more of this. So if you don't have anything to add, I'm going to go into the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll hold my commentary for when we get to the meta-analysis portion of the show.
Okay, so information for medical professionals and staff. Chief Medical Executive, Deputy of Health for Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Joe 9 Keldon. Thank you. Okay, so it's presentation. Target audience here: healthcare providers, public health professionals, healthcare administrators, and other professionals who may have a role in screening for or taking care of patients with COVID-19, and obviously Doovoid and Church of Entropy's audience. Objectives: identify a suspect case of COVID-19, manage patients who have or are confirmed, who may have or are confirmed to have COVID-19, prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the healthcare setting and community, assess the most up-to-date national Michigan-specific resources regarding COVID-19. Okay, so they have a disclaimer: fluidity of situation, check these other sources. This could change at any moment. Chat. So this is your official stuff out of Michigan. So you get the current update: epidemiology and clinical characteristic, public health prevention efforts, evaluation of suspected COVID-19, infection control in ambulatory and hospital settings. Okay, so we've seen this a bunch of times, so I'll skip these ones that we've already talked about to save time, although some nice graphics from this slide. Index case potential to before saying that these what they're calling index case potentials, the virus in these animals that carry viruses that are not known to man, but had they been infected in man, could be very deadly. So it's possible that there's actually billions and billions of these viruses that exist in these animals, and in fact would kill us if they got to us. So and it could also be interesting is that's from the group strategy, that's a defense mechanism in the environment of maybe the animal, to say of against other animals, larger animals encroaching upon them, that viruses are somewhat of a defense mechanism. That's why I talked about the pangolin, that the pangolin carrying around a deadly virus like this could have been its natural defense mechanism against larger mammals encroaching upon it, and or even man, that it developed a defense specifically to man. So that's interesting, and we'll talk more about that. But so this some very good graphics on this. So that's the John Hopkins one. The basics. We've covered most of this. This is going to have better statistics on comorbidity conditions. So the death rate in males, God forbid, 4.7%, and females 2.8%. There's different studies with different numbers, so I'm not an expert to say what the best numbers are, but these are the numbers that the Michigan Department of Health is giving. So these are comorbidity conditions that, God forbid, if one of these people has these conditions, the percent chance of death jumps up drastically. So people 80 or over, almost 15% chance of death, 70 to 79, 8% chance of death, and we'll see more numbers. But a large part of that is these comorbidity conditions: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, chronic respiratory disease, cancer. No morbidity condition, there's only a 1.4% chance of death. Okay, so we've seen similar things like this in other slides, so there's a lot to cover. So let's see, does the patient meet criteria for testing? Decisions on which patients receive testing should be based on the local epidemiology of COVID-19 as well as the clinical course of illness. Most patients with confirmed COVID-19 have developed fever and or symptoms of acute respiratory illness, like cough or difficulty breathing. Clinicians are strongly encouraged to test for other causes of respiratory illness, including infections such as influenza. Epidemiological factors to help guide decisions on testing any persons, including healthcare workers who have had close contact with a laboratory-confirmed COVID-19 patient within 14 days of symptom onset, a history of travel from affected geographic areas within 14 days of symptoms onset. And God forbid, that is going to include New York City soon. So when you thought of Wuhan and avoiding people to travel, now you're thinking New York City. Like if you've been in contact with someone who's been in New York City in the last 14 days, God forbid. So phone triage of patients with concerning history or symptoms, evaluate symptoms, travel history. I'm not going to read through all these. I read how my dad is doing it, and I'm sure my dad largely based his decisions off of the medical associations or health officials and however they ruled. So if you're looking at providers, I guess this is their procedure algorithm for how it goes from a provider to the state health lab, review of specimens. I'm not going to go through all of this because there's so much. Home care instructions, and saying if you are a doctor, you're not watching the stream, but that you're just for concerned people that want to know more about this. Encourage them to think more about this. The patient histories type things. Your various masks. You get your N95s, a regular patient mask, provider mask, N95 respirator mask. Those are a lot more available. If you don't have that available, keep the patient in a private room, ensure the face mask remains on. Place patient in airborne infection isolation room. So you gotta say, do you have an isolation room to place these patients in? So there's a lot of considerations. So right now, from your average person watching this stream, you say, I'm just going to avoid public content and isolate, versus the person considering, keeping a business open, or just how they're going to deal when they're in public during what could possibly be months, versus a person who knows that they're going to be directly in contact with people with this deadly disease. And, considering what's going to happen over the next few months if millions of people become diagnosed from it, saying that what I'm showing you right now that is only applicable to healthcare providers will likely be applicable to everybody in a few months, just because millions of people are going to have it. You understand what I'm saying, Jennifer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because as of now, you could just, okay, I'm just going to isolate and stay away from people who might have it. But after millions of people have it, it may become impossible to isolate from people who have it. And then you'll have to consider, basically these protocols that I'm giving right now for doctors are going to be applicable for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, for Brahmins, it's not unheard of to do stuff like that. So,
we'll talk more about that later. Right? I've been thinking ritual purity standards, where like Brahmins, even Orthodox Jews, or various religious traditions, where people have ritualistic purity standards and are used to maintaining, something for the ability to perform certain rituals, and then what's considered ritually pure and clean, and so this social distancing, various things. It's different for religious purity standards than for health reasons. But yeah, that's something I definitely want to talk about at length. So personal protective equipment. So you have standard precautions, social distancing, don't touch things unless you absolutely have to. And if you do touch it, do it in a way that's intelligent. And I think generally, I don't really touch things in general. Like it's just self-control. I teach kids how to play chess, and a lot of kids, they want to move the piece around. Think with your head, not your hands. And even though generally I don't believe that consciousness resides in the brain, but like as you think, hands don't think with your head, not your hands. Taking the piece in your hand and moving it isn't going to help you think better. But a lot of people that haven't been through rigorous meditation, self-control processes or thought about that, just be more careful what you touch. And then every time you touch something, there has to be a consideration how you do it. Is that going to make you dirty? Do you have to go through a cleaning after touching that? And that could be, really anything that you touch. So you have to, if you don't know how to think in the proper scientific understanding of, what can you touch, what can't you touch, what cleanliness protocols do you have to take after you touch certain things, and then what type of precautions, gloves, gowns, eye protection, goggles, face shield, airborne precautions, your fitted N95 masks or PRP and better, just the basic donning, we'll see later that there, certain order to donning protective equipment, that when you put on protective equipment, there's a certain order that you're supposed to do it in order to maintain the most amount of cleanliness.
Yeah, it ultimately boils down to how much capacity you have to inhibit your initial impulses. And maybe this whole disaster will teach people why people with poor impulse control have to be restricted from spreading their toxicity in the environment by any means necessary, or else it just spreads to everybody because it's like a lowest common denominator type thing. Hence the need for certain restrictions on movement of people.
I agree 100%.
A healthy society.
But let's finish up with let's try to keep this part more like pure science without karma. And then after I finish this, we'll talk pure karma because, just for the larger audience that might.
Karma is part of science. It's just cause and effect, but no problem. We can
continue. Yeah, I agree with you. But
medical aspects of it now, and then we'll go on to the spiritual aspects later.
Yeah. Okay, so, if the certain procedures and we think about this, talk about it later, like, who, do you have to have different rooms, set up, and then can you makeshift things from places that weren't built, for epidemiology and the cleansing? So there's a lot of things that are to be thought about and just time limiting. There's a, aerosol generating procedures, make it less likely that people cough, I guess, by controlling air conditions, that collecting specimens from people, and even, someone has it, that, you're trusting the science and the gloves and the technology where you're going to be sticking something on the tongue and collecting a specimen of this deadly coronavirus. So, that this would be, the health conditions for someone that, is really doing that. And then you have, like the people, the drive-through checking stations that people have where you pull over and someone will have this protective gear on, and either they do it themselves on you, or maybe they give you the swab to do yourself, and they take like a swab from your mouth or nose and they just test that for the virus. So, say they have testing stations or in the hospital. So like where and how they're going to test, but these are the methods that they're testing versus, further confirmation, see how accurate these are. Those swab tests might only be 70% accurate. Versus.
Yeah, it's kind of scary because, one of the possible origins for the virus is an actual lab that was working on applications of the virus science, right? So if they weren't able to keep it on lockdown there, it must make the people working with it now a little bit nervous, especially considering they haven't even established if this thing can be an airborne pathogen or not.
Yeah, because it's very difficult to think and understand it. And, we talk about like the evolutionary understanding versus maybe more spiritual understanding. If you look at the, so to say, the fight for resources between, the virus and man and various things, and you're saying like, well, if you're from the biblical tradition, you have an anthropomorphic view of the world, you think man will beat this virus. But maybe like a JF moral nihilist type view, like there is no guarantee we are going to beat this virus, and there is no guarantee long term that there's anything we could do to beat the viruses. But in terms of the, that's for the later discussion. But in terms of this is the current best practice standardization of our society. This is what doctors generally are going to be practicing. Nothing is foolproof. And if you are a medical professional, regardless what your spiritual or religious beliefs are, when you became a doctor and took the Hippocratic Oath, you took upon yourself that you're willing to put yourself in risk in these type situations.
Yeah, that's part of the duty of the added prestige of the doctor. They have a higher social standing, so they have to take to assume a certain amount of duty, and there's an associated risk with that, i.e. getting infected by working to ultimately prevent more harm from the virus spreading, creating a localized harm to yourself in order to make that greater trade-off.
Yeah, this is probably going to be more for next week, and we get more into the science, and it's actually related to what I'd like to be doing more in like civil engineering and the type environmental controls, can you control the different factors, humidity, temperature, or whatever, to make the virus less likely to spread. And, certainly in hospital or areas where, people are likely to be infected, you might want to control your environment like that. And then, as I said, if this goes as projected and there's no miracle cure and millions of people, or even tens of millions, or God forbid hundreds of millions or billions, or everyone is infected soon, that these precautions that they're taking now in hospitals will be precautions that like intelligent people will probably be taking everywhere. So discharge, how do these patients eventually go home? So some more data. This is the daily outset cases, and you see the first hump was China, then Europe and North America maybe happening at the same time. It might be better. Now you see Europe. This hasn't been updated recently, but you see Europe and North America coming, and some more statistics. Okay, so this is unfortunately unfortunately, I guess, because there's a lot of information here, my second to last slideshow. So let me just flip through this real quick. I put this earlier. I Facebooked it. It was too long to even to put up, but this is the Jack Ma Handbook of COVID Prevention and Treatment. And faced with an unknown virus, sharing collaboration of the best remedy. The publication of this handbook is one of the best ways to mark the courage and wisdom our healthcare workers have demonstrated the past 2 months. Thank to all those who contributed to this handbook, sharing this invaluable experience with healthcare colleagues around the world while saving the lives of patients. Thanks to the support from healthcare colleagues in China who provided experience that inspires and motivates us. Thanks to Jack Ma Foundation for initiating this program, and to Ali Health for the technical support, making this handbook possible to support the fight against the epidemic. This handbook is available to everyone for free. However, due to limited time, there might be some errors and defects. Feedback is welcome. I'm not going to read this. But just say, okay, part 1 is prevention and control management, isolation area management. I'm going to show some of the diagrams. I'm just going to read through some of the ones I'm going to show the diagrams of. Staff management, personnel protection management, hospital practice protocols, digital support. There's more nursing care for patients. And, this has some good diagrams, charts. So I encourage people who want to know more about it to read the whole thing. I read the whole thing earlier. And, so here, have it put into, Jennifer's background in physics, not necessarily for medicine, would also have similar things like this for maybe nuclear areas or nanotechnology or various things that you need clean areas or very sensitive to any contaminants for like chemical testing or whatever. But you have level 1 protection, level 2 protection, which you're in level 3 protection. Level 1's your pre-examination triage, and for that, just disposable surgical cap, mask, work uniform, disposable latex gloves, and/or disposable isolation clothing if necessary. Level 2 protection is for the people who, from the level 1 have been determined to be more likely to have it because they have a fever. So there, you're adding on to that an N95 mask. And goggles, and there you have isolation wards starting because here you're getting to the point where people are going to definitely be confirmed. So this your level 1 is hopefully your area where people don't have it, and your level 2 is for the area where people might have it, and your level 3 is the area where people definitely have it. So the level 3, you got full face respiratory protective devices and powered air purifying respirator. And there, you could be performing operations on, God forbid, people that have it. Here's, some just nice diagrams. And I said, like, don't be surprised if, like everyone's doing, like not everybody, but, if you want to go out in public and, fulfill a public role, that you might, like pay attention to this stuff. So like the hand wash, after the hand wash, cover your hair, places that might be dirty, put the mask on, put on inner disposable gloves, put on goggles and protective clothing, then put on disposable latex gloves. So that's, you notice the 2 layers of gloves. So first you put on a pair of gloves, and then you put on everything else, so everything is covered. And once everything else is covered, you put on your second layer of gloves, and you'll see taking it off why that's necessary. So here, when you take it off, the first thing you do is, because you're presumably, let's say it's guaranteed you have the coronavirus on your outer pair of gloves, because you're saying, like, for these medical people that are dealing with patients who have coronavirus, you say, okay, that glove they have is guaranteed to have the coronavirus on it. And, they might be, it looks like they're washing their hands with soap with the gloves on. So first thing they do, they're going to take the outer gloves on and put on a new pair of outer gloves. So it's interesting. So that they're going to take the guaranteed to be infected outer gloves off, throw it out, wash the inner gloves with soap, and then put on a second pair of gloves in order to take off the rest of this protective equipment. No, I don't think I'm not sure if they replaced the outer. If they did, I'm not sure if they went to the. If he had to replace the outer gloves with a new pair of gloves, so he probably just washed it, and then at the end, once everything else is taken off, then the last thing that's taken off is the inner pair of gloves. And so it's a pretty intricate procedure. Have you ever seen something like that, or just intuitively makes sense to you?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. I've always been hypersensitive to cleanliness, so.
I mean, you've never done that.
Protocols need to be engaged to make sure there's no chances of cross-contamination.
Yeah,
Thank you.
But you've never done that, have you?
Well, I already take pretty strong measures for.
I mean, like the double pair of gloves. You never.
No.
Yeah, that you would
I've
first.
Never worked with a doctor in this life.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there was some pretty cool graphics there, and it's saying, just to think about how dangerous this is, and the likelihood that all of us are going to be in that close proximity to infected people very shortly. And so, sometimes, the test, and saying you have like the CT scans, and you could see the effect of coronavirus taking over and infecting these ACE2 proteins that exist all over the lungs and the whole gastroendocrine tract, but it's the damage that they do to the lungs that is the most and the most deadly. And there's a huge amount of that protein there. I guess image of what does this coronavirus look like on your gastroendocrinological tract. So you could see like, okay, the coronavirus has hit these ACE2 receptors and it's taken over and it's turned these cells into a machine making factory that makes millions of those viruses, and then those viruses get pushed to the surface. Well, like any mucus, I mean, generally that's how the body expels these. That's the way the body's supposed to do it. That's one of the purposes of mucus, is to do this. But at the same time, that could cause a spread of the infection. But people who know the basic biology and anatomy, that's the purpose of mucus, and is to do this. But the dead cells pile up on the gastroendocrinological tract, and the mucus will eventually separate it, get it up, and then it'll be expelled through spitting or swallowing or a sneeze or a cough, or just through regular speech. A lot of times these small saliva particles will come out, and the saliva particles, if you have coronavirus, are likely to have coronavirus in it. Right. I mean, so just as someone who knows biology and hygiene, I'm sure you're familiar with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you never planned on being a doctor. So here you have this is operating on a person with coronavirus. And so here they actually have like oxygen or some sort of environmental controls being put into the mask. So the face is completely covered. They have goggles, and I guess they're being fed oxygen so they could breathe. And it might also have some sort of environmental control that makes it, that puts certain chemicals that make it less likely for the virus to spread. But you're saying that it's almost like a spacesuit, that these doctors, well operating on people that, God forbid, have this deadly coronavirus, that they can't breathe the same air in this level 3 protection zone. They actually have to have oxygen fed into their masks. And I'm not sure if you're are you hearing a lot of this stuff for the first time, or maybe logically you could figure that this is what they're doing, but is this the first time you're hearing this?
I've heard a few different theories as to how to get the oxygen most effectively to the lungs. Apparently they're getting people to lie on their stomachs because somehow that does something.
No, I'm talking about the doctors, that the doctors themselves need their own oxygen tank. I mean, in Italy, so this is in China how they did it. In Italy, it appears that they're putting like these plastic bubbles, like at least in some areas, over the heads. But I say, no, here's the picture. Your doctors are completely covered and they have no source of oxygen. So the doctors need their own oxygen tanks to feed oxygen into their protective suit so they could breathe. Besides that, what we're talking about, the defibrillators last week, I'm talking about the precaution taken in China was so much so that they were so covered that they couldn't even have a source of oxygen. They needed oxygen tanks.
Yeah, it makes sense because it appears that the places where air is recirculated that you're getting more infections, which is evidence in support of the position that it's actually airborne pathogen.
Yeah, I'm not going to show the pictures of Italy right now, but if you look at the pictures of Italy right now, the doctors are not like that. So this is, China, and they just released this recently in the last week. But so it's interesting, and even so you say here in the U.S., if you looked at Jack Ma and the Jack Ma Foundation of Alibaba, and what they said there, that is not the protocols the Michigan Health and Human Service we're delivering. The protocol for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is much less than they did in the infectious areas in China. So God forbid, as this increases in New York, it might already be like this, where the procedure they have for Michigan would not be good enough. Like my dad said, it's going to be 2 weeks and then they'll reassess it. And I don't know how the major hospitals here in Michigan are working, but presumably that's the type thing that if you compare what's happening in Italy to China, that's something to consider. Okay, so this one maybe I'll need your help with, and this is the last one. So I'm not going to do any more with this calculator. So we'll probably come back to it next week. But it's pretty cool. God forbid, but the mathematics, and people want to know more about this bending the curve and different scenarios and for how bad it could be next week. And so wow, a lot of information. We've been over 2 hours, and I still got one more. So you ready? These are the I still got 2 more. Wow.
Yeah, I'm ready. Go ahead. I'm enjoying it.
Okay. This is important. So this is from the World Health Organization. I guess a lot of this is going to be repeats. Hopefully you get through these 100 slides quickly, using different type of viruses, animal, things like rabies, influenza, source. Here you get the possibly likely the pangolin. I'm not going to comment so much, so we could get to the comment part of it. So a lot of these are incubation period, things that we've talked about before. These slides are already quite old, so they're not even that relevant. We'll see the next one, the statistics, the updated ones. This one had some nice graphics that I wanted to show it. So let me just make sure this is in the chat, and if anyone wants to look at this more. But almost all this information is stuff we've covered. Here's interesting, various forms of coronaviruses that have already spread across the world in different forms. So here, I want to show better pictures of these. I think this is why I've included these slides of these isolation units and level 1, 2, and 3 areas. So, and this is more related to my actual professional field of civil engineering. And I've actually studied hospital design in various things, and that would be a consideration. I never thought much I'd read about it more from civil engineering. I'd never thought about it from the medical perspective. So it's good I'm going through these and just see these pictures and think about it in the future that relate to various things. And the main thing that we're going to do to beat coronavirus is going to be human coordinate. Can humans coordinate to beat this virus or not? And we're definitely taught quite a bit about that. And so here's like a drive-through swab testing that had been in China, and these slides are already from more than a month ago, and coming soon, God forbid, to a town near you. They're already in New York and across America. These type things. These are actually temperature measuring. So he's not taking a swab. He's just taking a person's temperature and presuming that if the person doesn't have a fever, they're not highly contagious. They might still be infected, but if they don't have a fever yet, they're unlikely to be highly contagious. Versus your people in China with your full body coverages, and I'm not sure, these guys don't look like these guys aren't so covered that they need air tanks. Like the doctors in the hospital have even more coverage than these guys on the street. And I'm saying, God forbid, these, and showing these because these pictures out of China, this is what it looks like in New York right now. And unfortunately, New York probably isn't as together as China is, because China is more prepared. They've been dealing with these things for a longer period of time, and maybe certain cultural differences in terms of power distance and authority structures will make it more or less difficult for people to follow to successfully beat this virus. And so we would think more about the strategy of the virus, that could there be a strategy of a virus that affects the different cultures differently. So more basic things, but nice diagrams. So if you're in a hospital or something, these are the type like plastered posters they might have all over the place to remind you, or even a facility like new coronavirus policy. These are the new rules. These are what you need to do to work and not infect other people, not get infected yourself. A consideration for pregnant patients. I just wanted to mainly show the nicer diagrams. There's a lot of information. People want to know more. Read through that. I just let me flip through the rest of these. Okay, so these are the type things that you're going to see everywhere, and versus the type things that you might see for staff at a medical center or just in any public place. If you have a business and you're now you got to enforce these hand washing procedures and remind people like, you touched that, you touched the door handle and forgot to wash your hands, type thing. Is it going to be like that in public for a while? Could be. Okay, so what happened to my I think I closed the wrong one. Okay, let me get back to the Statista Corona. Here they are. Never mind. Okay, yeah, I forgot I downloaded them as PowerPoint. So, okay, so Jennifer, this one's the Statistica, and I didn't have a chance to review this. I just got the download as we were talking. So this is the last one. If Erica, you're hanging out, or anybody still doing, I might even I got my notification for the course out of China. Epidemics 2 is now out, so I'll be not taking the course for credit, but I'll be listening to the lectures. Okay, so let's do it. Here's the Statistica, so just a whole bunch of charts and graphs on coronavirus. So see how long is the table of contents? So 58 of them. So we got worldwide overview, then China, then the rest of Asia, then Europe, the Americas, and public opinion. So there's a web page that specifically works on statistics, and I guess a lot of these are up to date, up to yesterday, March 20th. So here you got, and these are different places have these numbers slightly different. So here they have as of March 20th, 234,100, and we're maybe over 300,000 now already. And different ones have different statistics. So I assume you're enjoying these charts, right?
Well, yeah, it's great to see the form that the information is taking, and I'm glad that you're keeping the focus on this, on the core science of it.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the karma too, but it'd be better able to understand the karma from understanding the data available. So new cases, a lot of the new cases is depending on testing or for whatever reason could be, that's not a completely smooth chart, but God forbid. It could be, they're saying it could get up to 500,000 a day if we don't do anything. And even if, we completely close down everything and put, full isolation where you are, it's still likely to get 2 or 3 times worse than it is now, according to most of the experts. But, to see this data and to see, how scary the prediction is, from the various scenarios, you see China, Italy, now the U.S., where there have only been a few cases, power of exponential growth. Now the U.S. has the 5th most highest number of cases. It's probably going to take over Germany and Spain soon, maybe even Italy, probably China. So, who knows what's going to happen? Certainly the U.S. has a larger population than these other countries. So very likely the U.S. is going to be the number one very soon. Maybe even by the end of the week, but, God forbid, maybe even by Wednesday. But that's the power of mathematics. The number of deaths, God forbid. There's about a 3-week average between onset and death. So of the people who are going to die, usually it's about 3 weeks from when they're infected. So right now, if 10,000 people are being infected a day, that means 3 weeks from now, statistically, you could expect 200 people to die. So it's almost a given as of now. So so that this is the science behind it, and so you see the numbers increasing in Italy, and the various percentages. For whatever reason, I didn't have that in my slides. I watched other slides. I did my best to find slides. Actually, some of those, better people that you don't have to release your slides. So a lot of people make their PowerPoints public. But I did see other slide shares that had better ones that didn't make them public, that had that mention how much time does it take between infection and symptoms to serious health problems to death. So you're looking about 3 weeks on average from infection, diagnosis of infection till death from the people who are going to die. So what are these? These are certain places, I guess, have had a long time with no reported cases. So Nepal supposedly went 55 days without a reported case. I don't know enough about that, but these statistics are interesting. We might return. I guess Statistica will probably update them, so I'm just going to delete this after the stream. But likely Statistica will have updated statistics next week, so we'll probably go over, the same page, the statistics. You're dividing up from Western, Eastern, Southeast, various ways of dividing these numbers up. Here's fatality rates of major virus outbreaks. So there have been certain virus outbreaks that were extremely deadly. Some of them were 80% of the people who were infected died from them. I think in that case, like less than 10,000 people got infected. So, but there have been viruses that have been, God forbid, much more deadly. So even here at 2.2%, I guess that's still in the top 10 of most deadly viruses. But relatively, there were viruses that were substantially more deadly, but they didn't spread as far. And I think you're going to see those statistics soon also. And here you got the amount of people that it spreads to for your infection rate. So your average person who gets it, how many people they give it to. So from, so COVID, we don't know yet whether, if it's more or less than SARS or Ebola. So here's just the statistics for China. We're looking at the recovered. So we'll see. We'll talk after I finish this slides. What more like, can you trust these numbers, and can you really know what's going on in other places? So I'll rather quickly go through these China numbers, and just because a long time. Here you see South Korea, the number of daily cases, and interesting that it started in a religious sect, but we'll talk about that. Maybe Orthodox Jews, how it spread in South Korea, this religious sect where it spread, and also in Qom in Iran, it looks like it spread through some sort of religious ritual. But there you see the South Korea map. Japan. Interesting, talk about what's going on in Japan. So Singapore. So these various things, like, I encourage people to make their own account. I guess, I'm not going to comment on every single one. Okay, so now we're at Europe, and, now we're over 10,000 confirmed cases a day for at least a week now. And, God forbid, this chart, it's likely to be 20,000 confirmed cases for the next few days, and then 50,000. You're saying it seems to double about every 2 or 3 days. So, by the end of the week, it could be 100,000 cases per day. And when it's 100,000 cases per day, that means 2,000 people a day are going to be dying from it. And kind of the best case scenario now with these predictions, if we're doing everything right, is that maybe in like 2 or 3 weeks, it starts slowing down. And possibly it won't keep on doubling every 2 or 3 days. But, like as said, by the time it starts slowing down, it could easily be up to 100,000 cases a day, which means that's 2,000 people are going to be dying a day, God forbid. So cumulative cases in Europe, over 120,000 now. We'll see if Europe as a whole might have more cases than the U.S. The U.S. will likely surpass any of those single nations, but Europe as a whole will probably end up with more cases than North America as a whole, just due to population density, which seems to be one of the larger factors, among other things. So as of now, here's your recovery, and so we'll probably talk next week about recovery. So as more people get it and recover from it, so as of now, not too much to note on the recoveries. Here's a more full breakdown of all the various different nations and the percentages they're making up of it. And there's a sizable chunk of thousands of people infected in basically all of these countries: Ireland, Greece, even Iceland, Belgium. So you see, it starts in Italy, and now, however big Italy is right now, God forbid, likely will happen to all of these nations in Europe. So, you will have to see how this goes. Here you're doing Italy. Like, I don't know that much about Italy, like Lombardy, Emilia, Romagna, Veneto, these areas that are being hit worse than others. So Lombardy, obviously, has more cases in it than the rest of Italy put together. And then, the next three provinces, probably have more than the rest of Italy put together also. So even in Italy, there's probably half of the country is not being that affected by it. So, consider what's going on there. And, now you're looking at Spain and, so like Madrid, not the same as Lombardy in that case, but where Madrid certainly has 20% of all the cases. I don't know the geography of these countries enough to know. Germany, could be picking up. We'll see. God forbid. I mean, the presumptions all these countries are going to be picking up, and that's why I just want to look at these charts, look at these numbers. Cases. You got Norway, Sweden, Denmark, all over 1,000. Finland 400, Iceland 330. I don't even know heard of the Faroe Islands, but the Faroe Islands 80. Benelux. I don't even know where Benelux. You know where Benelux is?
I can look it up.
Okay, maybe it's Netherlands, Belgium, even Luxembourg. Where you're saying like this is hitting everywhere. London. At this point, almost more cases in London than the rest of England. And it could be, geographically, it's going to be these more international, dense populous areas that get hit much worse. And we'll talk about that more. I mean, we have Erica still around. I'm sure she's got a lot of, red state type commentary. Also,
Benelux, Doooovid, is a politico-economic union and formal international intergovernmental cooperation of three neighboring states in Western Europe: Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's why those three were there. And, Poland. So Poland, they're not sure the reported case of the quarantine, so it's just starting. We'll see what happens there. Romania, so these are places where the infections hasn't really hit, but people are in quarantine. And the presumption is that right now is that it's basically going to hit everywhere, but that's yet to be seen. So who knows? And, people will deal with it as it hits their areas. So you got America where, if you look at this, the exponential growth, that's just crazy where, first started mentioning it. I streamed last week. It was here when it was just a few hundred, and now we're over 20,000. And when we were mentioning on Week in Review, like Gandalf, that was when it was only in China, and people start mentioning the scientist, and then when it first started hitting America to now, like bam, exponential growth, crazy, and we'll see if that keeps on going like that. Look at the number of cumulative cases, and you're saying that wasn't updated from March 18th. If it was, it'd be over 20,000. And at some point, you're going to have to put these into logarithmic scales because, in order to show what's happening with the exponential growth, they'll probably have to make it in the logarithmic scale. So we'll check after I'm done doing this. We'll so New York, majority of cases are coming. God forbid, New York is surpassed all of them by far. Could be the majority of cases. With California, I'll see how much it spreads, but Chicago, if there's big outbreaks, maybe God forbid in Detroit, in even suburban areas. Latin America, you see Brazil. These places only have hundreds of confirmed cases, but you go back here to these charts. It was only 2 weeks ago that there were hundreds of cases in America, and now we're at 20,000. So that could happen to any one of these cities. Any one of these cities in 2 weeks could be at 20,000, God forbid. And who knows after that? And any of these countries, could be at tens of thousands 2 weeks from now, and then after that, their cities and regional areas would be like that. And as of now, like God forbid, we don't know. It looks like that's going to happen. We don't have any way of stopping it, and that's why I've been talking for 2 hours just about this virus. Something that I've really never talked about before in my life. So look at these graphics. So now let's look at public opinion. So they've sourced some public opinion. As of March 1st, how many people have heard of coronavirus, Wuhan virus, or COVID-19? So high 90% as of March 1st. Scared of contacting coronavirus as of March 1st. So in the UK, they weren't that scared. So in Indonesia, in the United States, somewhat scared to very scared. And I'm only somewhat, honestly, I guess I would put somewhat scared. And I'm not a scared type person, but saying okay, take precautions, and it could be even with all the precautions I take, millions of people are going to be infected, and I'm not going to be able to isolate myself out from the larger society where millions of people are infected, for the months and months that it goes on. And so I will have to put myself in a situation where I'm in direct contact regularly with people who are infected. And, so it's okay, I'm somewhat scared, but I'm an informed person. This is as of March 1st. Now, what is it going to be now? So you see these numbers. It's interesting. Percentage of respondents worldwide felt COVID-19 posed a very high or high level of threat to their country as of February 29th. And I don't know. It was 28%. To 37%. So I don't know if 3 weeks ago I would have, because it's the power of exponential growth. I was paying attention, but no, I don't know if I would have known enough to know it posed a very high level or looked into it. I was paying attention, and I think I looked into it enough that I knew what the best practices were to do by the time it reached me. So, in terms of that, I paid attention enough to know, that's why I'm doing this stream. It's here. These are the best practices. So, that's why I'm doing these streams, for largely these people that it hasn't hit. So, it's okay. I wasn't that worried about it, but it's coming. And so now that it's here, or if you say, it's going to kill me, it's going to kill me. What could I do? Well, you could follow the best practices. So just interesting, monitoring fear levels. Quarantine towns and cities in their country would be okay if faced with large numbers. So majority of people agree. If you look at Asian places like Vietnam, over 90%, United States 70%, UK, so it's interesting. Russia, the various societies and how they view quarantine. People have taken extra measure, percentage taken extra measure to protect themselves from coronavirus. China, US, UK. So avoid crowded public places. This is as of March 1st. So I don't think I was doing this as of March 1st. Yeah, avoided crowded places. Yes, I already was avoiding crowded places. And actually, I'm not sure by March 1st if I was doing this. So in the US, versus the UK in the day. But wearing a face mask in public, avoid going to work, avoid consumption of raw uncooked meat, whatever the question. Stop sending kids to childcare or school, improve personal hygiene. So certainly, I started paying attention to hygiene already a month ago, more than usual, washing my hands more often, paying attention about social distancing because I'm familiar with social distancing, from before. So that, been paying, refrain from touching objects in public, something I'm usually very careful in general. But yes, certainly, the type things that you're looking at, improve personal hygiene, refrain from touching objects in public, avoid physical contact with tourists or anybody. And okay, so that was it. So I guess I'm not sure if Erica's still around. I'm even gonna just put the link straight into the chat and let Jennifer comment while I look at the latest statistics where they changed the format of this page. So yeah, I guess they changed the format of the page, made it bigger, but I guess that's better. So the link is in the chat if anyone wants to come on and hand it over to Jennifer for her comments while we see the statistics. So they added, they made it bigger, and they added deceased. They added a column for deceased in the last 24 hours, and they added so the United States last 24 hours 2,600. It must not be accurate, these things, but I guess he's updating the cases and
some people in the chat are asking number of tests given versus positive. I think maybe what they're alluding to is whether there's been any indication of false positives coming out of the tests that they have right now, because I think I may have heard something about that in passing.
Well, I mentioned that, and it wasn't on. I couldn't find any of these PowerPoints, and because I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to be able to accurately answer these questions. I guess I did watch a lot of stuff, and I heard that those swab type tests might only be 70% accurate. That if you test negative, there's still 30% chance you could have it. God forbid, and I don't know about false positives. If you could test positive and not have it, that information is probably out there. I wasn't able to find slides that had that. As this goes on more and more, like next week, there should be better information. And saying like Doovovid is not a cutting edge researcher in this field or the expert who's going to be able to answer difficult questions about the current state of this pandemic.
They say they're wondering how many negatives come out of the test results. I doubt those meta-analysis studies have been done yet.
No, they release the data. Usually they release the number of tests and positive. So I even think in Michigan, I'll look for a second. I'm just looking at these data, so it doesn't look. So let's see, Michigan coronavirus tests. So I think even Michigan, oh God forbid, 1 month old just tested positive. Michigan coronavirus surges, more tests, but shorting remains. The state has capacity to test about 1,500 people every day in their lab. So now we have 800 positive, 1,000 tests per day. So I'm not sure, but I mean, I think I saw one place that had some total statistics. Maybe let me see, New York coronavirus tests. Tests negative. So I think there is information on the number of tests that have been given, but I'm not sure where to get that from. So I don't seem to be finding it. Let me just check these Jewish periodicals. God forbid. Okay, so you see the I heard the one, a lot of Jews are testing positive of it. Here's a rabbi in Paris just died from coronavirus. First man in Israel, 88-year-old Holocaust survivor. They're claiming in this town of Orthodox Jews that they're trying this what did you say that drug was again?
Chloroquine.
Chloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine. So that I guess in so this whole town is trying this hydroxychloroquine, and there's a live blog. There's 60 deaths in New York. Famous rabbi died. Lakewood, also a majority Jewish town. At least 5 Lakewood residents are in critical condition from coronavirus. Few on respirators, multiple others in the ICU. So they're saying, God forbid, coronavirus appears to be hitting Orthodox Jews. First, like I mentioned in the thing, where in South Korea, it spread most through this like Christian religious sect, and then in Guam, there was supposedly like this religious thing where like they had people from Wuhan. They were like foreign students, and they had some ceremony where they'll kiss this religious outbreak with religious object, and that caused mass infection. It's interesting, like the ritual bath for women that are not mass that's being considered vital. I didn't cover what's considered vital or not. I could check the New York Times, but the female ritual bath that have to purify women from menstrual impurity, allowing them to have relations with their husband. So that has been deemed essential. So from the Orthodox religious law, a woman can't have relations with her husband during her menstrual period, and can't have relations after her period is over until she's dipped in this ritual bath. So that has been deemed an essential service, being kept open. That's an interesting note. And we'll see if, God forbid, this thing gets worse, if that changes. So I guess that's the end of my presentation. So there was quite a bit of stuff. So almost 3 hours, probably almost 2.5 hours of stuff. I'm not sure if you have energy to just talk about karma and stuff, or you want to save it for tomorrow.
Sure, why not? Yeah, I'd love to talk about it.
I put the link in the chat. So yeah, what do you have to say? And I might even, if you have another, we'll talk maybe like 10-15 minutes, and then if you want to keep on going, I'll probably have to take more medicine. You'll have to hold it down for a few minutes.
Well, let's see if anyone showed up. Did anyone come in the back room?
No, I put the link in the chat. So we're down to 15 people, and I wasn't really interacting with the chat. So Erica, who isn't here right now, Citizens Reporter, was the only one in the chat that I saw that's ever took the link and came on. I think maybe Rook has actually came on. So we'll see if anyone wants to talk about it, or if you want to talk about these various factors, or spiritual, or adding a layer of karma, or even kind of looking at the virus, or maybe the Pangolin is their group evolutionary strategy, kind of like Kevin McDonald, and Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy, and then anti-Semitism as a group evolutionary strategy. And you think the virus as having its group evolutionary strategy, and the coronavirus among the viruses, the viruses that infect humans, the viruses that just target one specific animal, or target a whole bunch of animals, or that might jump from being to being. And then is it possible connected to the strategy of endangered species, that like the endangered species, so to say, can they protect themselves against humanity by facilitating a virus? And it comes into maybe a question of kind of like will or personifying, giving a personality to the virus or the pangolin versus saying like, no, it's just a random factor, and it's just a matter of statistics and chances and probability, and like these viruses have no will. And even the pangolin, if it might be a mammal that could conceivably be comparable to a cat event, or something maybe, but to attribute that kind of intention to a group strategy. So that's something interesting to discuss. Also, the Dharma aspect of your obligations to society. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of implications, societal to across the board, economic shutdown, oil prices, like you've been covering in the news. There's direct relationships to streaming and the way people get their information. Okay, Rook says he doesn't have StreamYards and can't add it to his device. Okay, and any of the science aspects, and saying, this week we got a little bit more in detail, and that people are releasing more information, and I'm sure there's people who know quite a bit about information. Maybe I could have found some better slides. I looked around actually a good few hours, but presumably by next week there'll be a lot more better slides and more information, as a lot of the top minds around the world are putting quite a bit of mental energy into this, and we'll talk more about the biochemistry and biophysics of the coronavirus. And so that that might be a preview in terms like the physics of how this virus spreads, and projectiles and droplets, and what does it mean? Can a virus just like exist in the air in like a humid water droplet, or does it automatically fall to a surface? And what about entropy? Like, what does it mean that a virus can't survive? Like, does it die? How does it die? Is it just the principles of entropy that if the virus doesn't find a successful host within a certain amount of time, like the forces of entropy will force the cell to die, or various things. So all these things are interesting to talk about. Plus the more the greater karmatic, and I think connecting it to environmentalism seems pretty obvious, and probably global warming and the expansion of human activity, the destruction of critical ecosphere and rainforest, and mass extinction of animals. And you're saying that if we don't turn the tide on that God forbid, this could just be the beginning. So you showed like this COVID is, in terms of its deadliness, killing 2% of the people who it gets, is still in the top 10. Most viruses never reach, killing 2% of people, thank God. But at the same time, there's still been, 6 or 7 viruses that killed, well over 20%. And there were actually a few viruses that killed over 80% of the people that infected. So it's something to think about, that if this is, some, virus that has a mind of its own and a strategy of its own, and plans to, keep its, the virus is going to stand its ground, so to say, and it's going to keep on, mutating and evolving, or doing what it has to do to survive, and fighting the battle with the humans. And it's a way to look at it. And can we just assume that these viruses are going to keep on coming and keep on getting worse?
Well, that's a lot of questions all in one. So I'm trying to make some notes there for what's the most important thing. One thing that came up on the show last week in review, we were talking about subjective-oriented basis for predicting effects, and we went into speculating about what the nature of the personality of the coronavirus as an entity could be devised, right? So the point that I was trying to make is that a maximally correct, subjectively oriented model actually makes more predictions for the layperson than the objective-oriented one, simply because the objective-oriented solution is too abstract for the average person to understand. But if you give it a personality, ooh, scary Corona-chan, she's going to get you, it makes it a little more salient to people who don't have enough cognitive capacity to visualize things.
Well,
So that
okay.
was important. And then another thing I wanted to mention was
Well,
because you
just the
keep
first point of the strategy. If you did you want to go through those point by point and talk about the strategy first, or do you want to make your points on all of them?
well, there was just one other thing that came up, but we can like parse it over. Like I can keep going. Like to keep talking about it, I'm cool with that. But the thing I wanted to mention
I was
in
going to say that the
kept
strategy
bringing
is
up
the
this idea about
personality.
the pangolin, right? This idea about animal sort of vengeance on humans type of thing. So the pattern that I could discern was that there's a religious belief that animals are disposable. And that false belief, basically like treating animals as though they didn't have consciousness, that false belief leads to nature treating us like we're disposable. So basically, torturing animals leads to the planet having a kill off of us because we were creating an imbalance in this sort of web that is propped up by these rival survival strategies acting. And I don't want to say symbiosis, but there's a balance between their respective forces. Like they each contribute something to the overall ecosystem. And if one grows exponentially, it sets the whole thing out of balance, which maximizes the chances that there's going to be some reset effect. And that's an entropy thing because the system always reorients to maximize the entropy, which means basically that there shouldn't be this huge like gradient of parasitic growth. And eventually the finiteness of the planet will put an end to exponential growth, in other words. So yeah, go ahead if you want to start with wherever direction you wanted to take the analysis. I can just
Yeah, I appreciate your commentary, at least on the first point of the group strategy, and you were saying the personality. You said, okay, certainly the coronavirus, COVID-19, has so to say, a strategy. It has an evolutionary strategy. And if you say, what does it mean to have a personality? What's a personality? You could know about a personality, just like Plato's analogy of the cave and seeing the reflection by how it acts. And, you could determine its strategy from how it acts. And from there, you could at least have a hint to its personality, or you could possibly define it, say, no, its personality is its strategy. So it's not necessarily like a vengeance or anything else. You're saying, like, no, we know how the virus acts. The virus acts according to a well-described pattern of behavior, and it's pretty obvious, so to say, in terms of evolutionary strategy. You could even explain why the virus does what it does in order to as a strategy for replication. So from that perspective, I think that's enough to at least describe a few attributes of the personality of the virus. And about the Pangolin, if you say, okay, karmatically, yeah, I agree 100% what you're saying, but here you're saying that you actually have a physical mechanism where mankind recognizes we're being killed, something really bad is hitting us, and the best bet we have is that, like, it grew in the stomach of this pangolin animal that most people have never heard of. But you're saying it's a karmatic. So if you want to understand how the spiritual realms interact with the material realms in mankind's hubris, and we start destroying the environment and think the world was built for us and we could just treat animals without any care and compassion, and there's going to be a karmatic a reaction to that. But from a factual basic, you say, like, yes, this endangered species. So if I say no, like, I don't think that the pangolin intentional. So when you talk like the Plato's form, you have the form of the chair, which is an intellectual concept, as opposed to the chair itself. So you have the pangolin as like the form, the intellectual concept, and then you have this defense mechanism of the pangolin against man. And you say largely the defense mechanism of these animals against man is the virus. And so it's not like intentional or but evolutionary strategy, that these animals carry these viruses in them and have some sort of symbiotic relationship with the virus. I mean, I doubt it's maybe there's some benefit. Like, we could see like quantum.
Yeah, I can tell you the benefit, Doovoid, because
Well, I'm just saying that just to finish the point here before you interject, and that's it, is saying the benefit of carrying these viruses, assuming there is no other benefit. I mean, you could go on and say there is a benefit, and they'll be interesting to hear that. But it's saying that if there were no benefit, and even if there are others, but the pure benefit of a defense mechanism, that the pangolin, it can't curl up in a ball and wait for the lion to go away because it can't eat them, to man, and therefore it developed these deadly viruses in its stomach as a way of protecting itself against man.
Yeah, so what you've said there is a subjective personification of what can be described as a force of nature. So we have this problem in evolution of the current model not really making the predictions, right? Natural selection does not predict what we observe, which is punctuated equilibrium. And punctuated equilibrium, I'm not sure if you've taken a look at my quantum evolution model, but basically what I'm saying is that when there's a huge change in the phenotype, that indicates a quantum state transition. And basically you have long periods of time where there's no state transition within the physical body, i.e. the shape of the body remains pretty much the same for a long period of time. And during that time, the mind is actually constantly evolving. And I think that the vector for this evolution is the virus itself, because the virus is very simple. Biologically, it can be crystallized, right? So it is a life. It interferes with life. It can replicate, but it requires life to replicate. So there's a bit of a debate as to whether it's alive. We can say that it's involved in life, but it's like maybe better to look at it as something that updates animal life. And at the same time, it updates itself. So it's like a way to make tiny changes or adaptations to the mind without shifting anything considerable in the body. That's why we have what they call evolved immunity. So at first, it's always the worst the first time you get something because it took longer for your immune system to respond to the invasion. And the reason it can respond quicker is because it's updated its quote software, aka something has changed in the information distribution of the quantum mind, but it's a very tiny change to include information about recognizing this virus's genetic material earlier on in the game. That's essentially the mechanism of vaccines. You're giving some form of it that can cause your immune system to learn what it needs to avoid that initial reaction, because you have to understand the symptoms of illness is actually your own immune system attempting to kill off the virus. You're not feeling the virus, quote unquote. So evolved immunity is all about how quickly your mind can feel the virus, because then it's going to kick into response, and it won't need to respond as much if the virus hasn't penetrated that deep, which is what makes this new virus so alarming, is because it has a long period where it's replicating, but it's not manifesting any symptoms. So for the first pass, for this one, it appears that the immune system is retarded in time, right? That's why they're saying there's this long incubation period. And then so when it finally does respond, it's very serious response because the virus has had all that time to replicate, right? Now, if we're able to adapt to this virus, and again, there's questions about whether we can, because if it's engineered, we may have a limited ability to adapt to it. But when and if we do, what you'll see is a quicker recovery time, because the immune system will have learned about what the genetics of this virus is and how to recognize its genetics earlier on in the game.
Yeah, yes. I think it's, taking it, trying to understand it from these different angles. And I think, you
have to look at the mind as something separate from the body. It's connected to the body, but it's separate, because the relay of causality won't make sense unless you have this intermediary quantum mind that is serving to order the information, which is later manifested in the body.
Yeah. So, trying to understand these things on the deeper levels, and causes, and then say even quantum mind, and you recognize all that we really don't understand, the huge amounts of unknowns out there, and when situations like this occur. And for the sake of general understanding, even for someone scientific, just to put your grasp around it, it pays to personify you know, even inanimate objects, but certain life, and even anthropomorphize, to look at what is the virus trying to do? What does the virus want? And these unknown questions that that you have to turn to complicated theories of evolution. And if you're looking at religious,
it's kind of like a sign that we shouldn't have been chopping up these animals in the first place, because they've had a chance to adapt to different viruses from us. So it's sort of like a warning of maybe just food safety. You shouldn't be eating the gizzard of an animal because it contains highly evolved specific pathogens that are not along your ancestral development line. And there's a reason why, people were cautioned against eating animals, especially wild animals, right? With a history for spreading disease.
Yeah, and so he's okay. This is the world we occupy, and there's all these various life forms, and just like maybe you never heard of the pangolin, but there is such a phenomenon, and the viruses, even though they're as I said, like an post-infected person that still has a whole bunch of the virus in them could have up to 10 million viruses per milliliter. Milliliters, not that much. You think you get like a liter of like a 2 liter of soda, or liter bottle of water, a milliliter. That's that's a pretty small amount, and that would contain 10 million of these viruses. And it is a physical phenomenon. Like, we basically know exactly what the virus looks like and all the various strains, and might even have like the full DNA sequence. But just knowing everything about it doesn't mean we could beat it. You just say, like, that's pretty clever. The damn coronavirus is pretty clever.
Well,
understanding how it works in the world.
Understanding how it works is the first step in taking as much control over the outcome as possible, because we have to understand the spreading vector, which also involves understanding, like, how do you protect yourself from getting infected in the first place? Because once you're infected, you have to kind of play catch up with your immune system, right? So understanding the core mechanism is the most important step. And then you can start to build solutions based on what's happening and how serious the situation is.
Yeah, usually good solutions will correspond and unify all levels, from like karmatic to biochemistry to medicine to the various micro to macro levels of looking at things. So next week, hopefully, like, presuming that that this thing's still going on, we'll probably look at the biochemistry, and if it's still going on 2 weeks from now, maybe we'll even be looking down to the atomic level, because I'm not an expert enough. I have to do more research, like I said, these S and N proteins, and what's that hook on that does to the ACE2 cells. And I will take that second course. I would have taken these courses on epidemiology. I mean, I would have taken the courses doing the homework and the reading, but like watch the videos and looked at some of the material from the Chinese course, even a coronavirus not broken out. But maybe now I'll pay a little more attention and more looking into it. But I think at any point you could start looking at the balance of forces, and kind of like what forces are being represented in what's going on, to understand it. And like the various macro levels of looking what's going on to the micro level, when there's actually, if there's actually a vaccine, what is that? And these different things for the question, like, what are the virus, what is the origin of the virus? That's a very controversial topic. That saying, where in the Vedas does it mention the virus, type thing. Well, in the Vedas it might mention that there's tiny like germs or particles, but it's unclear. The Vedas definitely mention a virus. Like if you look at biblical, is it till the scientific age, and Lister, and recognizing germs, and the understanding of the cell. In the ancient times, they didn't really understand these things, and therefore they put them into spiritual forces. Or is it possible that just with the increase in science, that really the spiritual forces that the ancients described is in essence the same thing that we're seeing with these viruses and various things? It's just that we have a better or more fine detailed understanding of the material world. But in terms of the spiritual understanding, the understandings from the acharyas, the scriptures, or whatever source is actually superior to the moralistic understandings that people possess today, even if we have a more precise material understanding, but at least by delving at these karmatic forces, it'll force people to dig more deeper into in ecology is a really an ununderstood topic, like climate, climate regulation, climate change, species, the balance of species. We got mass extinctions and something. So, is it possible that just millions of species could go extinct and it's no big deal? They're not important. And, so the things that people have been warning about, and your average person is just like, well, I only care about myself, or I can't really understand science or even have a paradigm in my head to understand what you're talking about. So they're just going to keep on going across their course of action until some drastic event like this happens, where it's like, what the hell are you talking about? I can't go outside for 4 months. And that will cause people. And I also had a thought on streaming. I was thinking, like, God forbid, like, going out and dealing with infected people, and as somewhat like a parallel, that's kind of like me and you on YouTube. Like we're just like spiritual figures that maybe have a community, people we're familiar with, and then there's the world and vast society of people that, God forbid, are infected by the spirit of folly and sin and impurities, and you have to go out into the world as a spiritual person and disinfect these people from largely their own poor decisions, by enlightening them on the possibility that if they made better decisions with their life, they could have better outcomes, or however you want to define your role as a spiritual guide. But somewhat all this looking at it, like, I'm not a doctor, and I thought I'd rather be a rabbi. I ended up a civil engineer, but I'd rather be healing people's souls than their body. But I think for the business that me and Church of Entropy are in, there's a lot of value to be learned at all these medical procedures, and understanding, like, how do you deal with like a deadly infectious person, which is kind of
exactly. Well, it's down to like the limitations of Western medicine, right? It's like, obviously there's some dimension in which it excels, but its failure to understand the mind sufficiently precisely as to be able to understand how to deliver medical information, because this placebo effect clearly is non-zero, right? So for those of you not familiar with the placebo effect, it's basically if you give someone pills that are, contain nothing, there will be a measurable shift. If you give a bunch of people sugar pills, basically some of them will actually get better, just because the patterning of ingesting medication makes them believe they're going to get better. And so they get better because they believe they're going to get better. And this is kind of coming back to this idea of self-actualizing and of manifest destiny, a very poorly understood concept that ultimately we co-create reality, simultaneous with all these other forces, right? So you start to break things down into this idea of, competing strategies, as Doovoid calls it, right? So I'm thinking what's happening right now is that the majority will was towards profit, but then as soon as people's like personal health gets threatened, the average will shifts to prioritizing health versus profits.
Just to answer Skathy's question, why do we assume that reducing the spread is the best way to prevent harm? So there's a question of utilitarianism and, what's the most harm to prevent? But, it's these like bending the curve and this thing that I'd shown earlier at, already an hour 50 into it from the New York Times, in the various scenarios if, we do nothing versus extreme measures. So the best current understanding of science is that, yes, reducing the spread. So if you're talking, I guess there's multiple ways of looking at it. So if you're talking reducing harm, if you're accepting the science that the experts are putting forward, and from the presentations I gave in the best knowledge of the best minds around the world, so if you're largely not skeptical of that, you're saying that there's going to be, this is a, I mean, you could say it's like a once in a century event, But then, you have to also look at the possibility, God forbid, that's related to something like climate change or destruction of the ecology. And just like, the warmest, it's supposed to be the warmest year ever, and that's supposed to be a 1 out of 100-year event. But then like 7 of the 10 warmest years in the last so many years, or whatever the statistics are, where they said like this is the event that could kill tens of millions of people. And I couldn't find the graph. There's a good graph during the Spanish flu of like 2 different towns where one enforced isolation and another didn't, and the one that did enforce isolation had like hundreds of thousands of more deaths. So at this point, that's the overall societal consideration, saying we don't want a mass casualty event, and we're willing to shut down society for a period of time, which could change. Saying if we're going to keep on having these, and we'll have to readapt society to have just people constantly dying from outbreaks of plagues and viruses, God forbid. So it could be we would need to adapt a new strategy. But as of now, they think the scientists think they understand. They think that if we do nothing, tens of millions of people are going to die. And if we, clamp down for 4 months, only a few 100,000 people are going to die. And, so that's the strategy that they've chosen. And as this goes out, it could be there will be rebellion, and it could be it could be this could lead to, there's many, obviously, like death could come at any time. Like our future in this world is not promised to us. And we all, any person who studied theology or religion knows that to be true. The people who've gotten away from that essential truth, there could be reminders though like this, that like we don't have a guarantee or a promise to tomorrow or to our health or to any of these things. And that's why you should be humble in service to the divine, and submit and all these various things. And then the question of utilitarianism, like the JF Stephen Molyneux debate, where I'm actually more on JF's side. Like if you're an atheist, you might as well be a nihilist than to try to, but if you did take like a Molyneux type view of utilitarianism, and you wanted to maximize pleasure and limit harm, and me and Jennifer definitely agree about the limiting harm. That's part of our religious principle, but not from like a secular selfish principle. But we've discussed utilitarianism countless times. I have streams and public study sessions that include the basics of utilitarianism. So if you're looking at this and you have a very difficult situation where it's like the harm of limiting people's short time on this planet by forcing them in lockdown for a few months, or letting millions of people die, or even of young people, limiting the best years of their youth for protection of the elderly. And so our various utilitarian calculations that you could make that would weigh it in a different way than our leaders are currently weighing it.
Yeah, it's tough. People aren't really sure who to take their cues from, because essentially people are driven to emulate behavior that's not going to affect their social status. So
if you only care about yourself, it's like, well, fuck, I only care about myself. It's hard to find leadership, and it's hard to form like a group and centralize around a leader of people who only care about themselves. And that's why usually people only care around themselves, centralized under the leadership of entertainers or athletes or people that really aren't leaders. And that's probably even our politicians is probably what you're going to see. Like coronavirus, you're saying like it's hitting elites more, because elites are more likely to get something that's contagious because they deal with more people. And so this virus is either a godsend. If you believe God to be the world, the virus is kind of like a godsend that people who are more spiritually in tune, and this karmatic balance was due for a long time. Okay, the markets were overbought and needed to crash, and like we were taking too much oil out of the ground, and all these various factors that saying like everyone was pretty sure like eventually some climatic God forbid mass casualty event was in order, was going to be necessary to reestablish some sort of order. And God forbid this virus, from a theological, it's just a warning for us to repent and change our ways. And if we don't change our ways, like right now, we're not isolating because we want to be better people and care more about the world and care more about each other. Although there might be, partial reasons like the elderly, but basically we're doing this because we're scared of death. And it's a bunch of people.
Dude, but I've been self-isolating since we started Week in Review. I've been self-isolating for like 5 years now. It's just something I had to do for my spiritual teachings because I didn't want to be distracted ultimately by a secular life.
Well, and God bless. That's why we're friends.
Blessing that I can do it. Yeah, exactly. So I'm not doing it because I'm afraid of death, and I fully expect that if I'm called on to preside over something, that I will have to, risk my life to do it, and I'm fully prepared to do that. But yeah, all in all, I hope this gives people a chance to self-reflect a little bit and shift a perspective towards a more self-empowering one, i.e. taking maximum control over the outcome, even though if it's something as small as, washing your hands or any of the other good advice Doovovid has mentioned in the stream so far.
Yeah, well, I wanted to put like a spiritual warning and say, like the Pharisaic understanding of the Hebrew prophets is that bad prophecies don't have to come true because people could repent. The good prophecies are guaranteed to come true, like the second commandment: God is an angry, jealous God who visits the sins of the parents upon the children 3 and 4 generations, but is trustworthy to reward the righteous for 1,000 generations. That bad calamity prophecies could be changed by us changing our ways, and and that is a sign saying like the coronavirus is so to say God's way of telling the world, like, get on track, you're messing up, and if you keep on messing up, there's going to be bad things that are going to happen, kind of like the flood or all anything of a biblical narrative that the virus or any calamity might fit in. But is saying from a more environmental perspective, if you look like what are the likely things that mankind as a whole are doing that are causing us to be on the verge of catastrophe, and this time that we're spending under quarantine, not because we want to perfect society and become better people, but because we fear death. So can we take this opportunity that God has given us by causing this calamity and our to work on our mutual fear of death, to slow down for a little bit, to use this slowdown to put ourselves on a better track. And saying if that is not the case, from the spiritual perspective, it will keep on getting worse because then God's will be manifested. And if mankind can't get its act together for God's will to be manifest, then bad things happen.
Yeah. Well, that's the role of the learned masters, is essentially to short circuit these karmic arcs, right? Because the sooner, if something has the potential to cause a lot of suffering, the sooner it's foiled, the better. And so understanding how these things propagate is the first step in interrupting their spread, because it's like, well, yeah, we have this obvious virus here. Is I was just saying in the chat, it's evidence that we're doing something wrong, but it's not actually telling us, well, what are we doing wrong? Because it's really not obvious. There's no, shorthand for what we're doing wrong. Ultimately, we're not approaching our lives with the right philosophy, but then what is the right philosophy and how do we get that across to people in a way that makes sense for them? And I know we can find the answers to that. And I think right now our job is basically to be as calm as possible and sort of show people that we're able to maintain a good, calm state of mind, even when things get difficult, and hopefully lead by example, be actual role models. How about that?
Yeah. So, hopefully, I assume, anyone who's watching me or Jennifer's channel, that's not one of our hate watchers, probably desires to want to be a good person and help people. And, this opportunity, someone especially scientifically minded, where you could be a good-hearted person, not understand science. And it'll be more difficult for people who don't understand the science to know how to act in, these risky situations where, you could be good at obeying protocol or having a good intuition about health. But, understanding the physics and science of what's going on, so like, no, I think I could be in a room, I think me and Jennifer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical doctor. I thought about becoming a doctor, but I think conceptually, you could picture like, me and Jennifer would be the type people that would be going in and putting those, masks on to try to save the life of someone who's, about to die from coronavirus.
And then we can just remind them that there is no true death. There's reincarnation. So we can start to teach people about how to enter a more calm state of mind so that they'll actually be more resistant to the virus when they reincarnate, because it's largely based on beliefs. The person with the highest, or let's just say the optimized self-confidence, is also going to be the most resistant to any type of environmental paralysis, because you have such high awareness that you can see very many steps down the line of what to do to avoid any type of suffering and calamity. So it really is an opportunity to shift perspective into something more tenable, because this fear of death and fear of the unknown is really driving people to quite an unpleasant state. It's basically palpable for me at this point how stressed out everybody is as a collective.
Yeah, so I think I covered this week pretty well from the health aspect. The first week it was just kind of like, what's going on? Why are we closing things down even though there's a handful of cases? And now it's obvious. And, I made the projections, according to the experts, is saying that what we're seeing now is going there's going to be millions of cases by next week. And, I'll keep on researching this, and, just as a concerned citizen and, concerned about my own health and my own life and my own family, and, plus as a, duty to, in the, there's a Hebrew expression that says Talmud Chacham Reshus Rabim, that, a wise person is public property. And, so if you have been given mental gifts or concentration gifts or acquired scholarship, you're saying it's not your scholarship. And, you have a duty, almost, to put it to, you're basically public property, that if you have this information, you have to make yourself public property to give that information over to other people. So it's just a insight, maybe, look at it from the Talmud. So hopefully I'll, just for my own concern, and I'll put together probably a stream next Saturday. Me and Jennifer, hopefully, we'll do a week in review. I mean, I might end up streaming quite a bit of chess, just because I got these tournaments and world championship variants coming up to practice, and I have the maybe the Ask the Rabbis and multiple truth hypothesis, and I wanted to connect the multiple truth hypothesis to coronavirus, but I won't do that tonight. And I also, since I'm using StreamYards, I only have 20 free hours, and I already used a few hours for this month, so I might run out. So maybe just call it a night. So I'll just thank Jennifer for joining me, and presumably we're going to be in the same situation next week. So we'll see what all the topics that come out on Week in Review. If JF confirms, I think I'm going to invite JF, John Frances Garepi of the Public Space, the Revolutionary Phenotype, who debated Stephen Molyneux, to appear on my channel and talk about the coronavirus. Obviously, he has a PhD in biology and has been covering the coronavirus for months now. If he agrees to that, hopefully Jennifer will be there, and that should be a great show. And we'll get JF's take on this, and questions.
We'll have to show them the meme I made tomorrow on Week in Review. Remember to subscribe to my channel. Week in Review will be live Sunday night at 8 p.m. Right, Doovoid? Or are we going to start earlier this week?
So I guess we'll be in touch. And I mean, I don't know if from the 13 people watching or anyone who's going to watch this between now and then, if they're going to plan on the schedule. But yeah, we could start early, like 7 or 8 if you want. I mean, last time I didn't we started a little early because I ended up playing chess, and then something got caught up, and then I had to eat, and then I didn't finish eating. I had to eat during the stream. But yeah, probably around 7, maybe 7:30 at the latest, if that's good for you.
Sounds great. Looking forward to seeing everyone there. And thanks again to the audience for participating in the chat, and look forward to seeing those of you who are interested over at Week in Review tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks again for hosting, Doovoid. Really high quality of information here. Very calm, and look forward to talking to you again real soon.